IB Nation, welcome to the Notre Dame Recruiting Hour. This is going to end up being a special edition, Ryan, because there is some big news in the Notre Dame recruiting world, and that is that 2025 quarterback Deuce Knight is committed to Notre Dame. We're going to break that down, take a brief intermission, and then, Ryan, you are going to talk about how big this weekend is going to be for Notre Dame. A little mini preview. We'll have a more in-depth preview of the actual visitors. You're going to do a special show later this week that we'll publish on the podcast and the YouTube channel, where you'll dive more into the players specifically. But you're going to talk about what this game means from a recruiting standpoint this weekend. And of course, Ryan, I'm rocking the gap closers because Notre Dame got a gap closer today. Yes, there you go. Ryan's rocking the gap closer because Notre Dame got another gap closer quarterback, Ryan. And I got to tell you, we're going to kick it off this way. Who knew that when Marcus Freeman, the defensive coordinator, former linebacker, got hired as the head coach, that the position Notre Dame would recruit the best in the next 3 cycles would be quarterback? Who knew? Who knew? But it's a big one, man. It's a big one. This is huge.
I mean, it's massive. I mean, we'll talk about all the implications, obviously. I mean, we'll talk about the proximity conversation, right? Because right now Notre Dame's 3 commits in the 2025 class are 2 from Florida and 1 from the state of Mississippi. So, like, that's pretty dang different, if I would say so myself, right? So a lot of big things, but obviously we'll focus heavily on Deuce Knight, who Notre Dame honed in on very early on in this recruitment, obviously, as a guy that they really wanted in this class. We've talked about this young man ad nauseum over the last few months because he was, for a large portion of that time, the top target on the board for Notre Dame. And there was obviously some back and forth, and Bear Bachmeier entered the fold, who Notre Dame really liked as well and would have taken Bear Bachmeier's commitment. But at the end of the day, Notre Dame got the quarterback that they wanted all along when it all came down to it and when all was said and done. So massive get for Notre Dame. Big time opportunity for Deuce Knight, a Mississippi kid who played a couple games in the state of Tennessee this year, to come up to South Bend, Indiana. And I mean, it's just, again, shows the trajectory of this program, I think. Going from Kenny Minchey to CJ Carr to now Deuce Knight, all 3 have some similarities, but all 3 have things that are very different that they bring to the table. And with Gino Guidugli leading that quarterback room in the near future, I'm very optimistic that Deuce Knight, if he hits his potential, will be a star for Notre Dame. So I'm super excited about this one, man. I really am.
And in a lot of ways, Ryan, I think Deuce Knight, and we have said this in the past, this is a perfect kid to get the year after getting CJ Carr, in my opinion, because they're really polar opposite players. And not just because one's from the South, one's from the North, one's left-handed, one's right-handed. CJ Carr is a 5-star quarterback on my board, just flat out 5-star quarterback, as I've talked about plenty of times. But CJ is a 5-star quarterback because he is talented, no doubt, but it's the floor. He's really smart. He's poised. He's got technical proficiency. Grew up around the game, obviously, with his grandfather being the head football coach at Michigan and winning a championship back in 1997. And it's just, he's got one of the highest floor. I would say this: CJ Carr has the highest floor of a quarterback that Notre Dame has landed since Jimmy Clausen back in 2007. Like, as far as just the floor. And he's a kid that you anticipate being ready to play somewhat early. And I would say the same thing about Kenny Minchey in the 2023 class, that it's about the floor and the intelligence and all those type of things. Deuce is and I would, might even be a better way to say this: Deuce is the polar opposite of both CJ Carr and Kenny Minchey. Yeah. Because those are just natural pocket passers with some mobility, especially CJ with his mobility. And so somebody said listed as a 4-star. Michael, you're on our show, right? So in our rankings, he's a 5-star, okay? But Kenny Minchey, top 100 guy on our board, they're both mobile to degrees. CJ's a much better athlete than Kenny, but they're pocket guys. Yep. Deuce has a chance to be that, but right now Deuce is a lot more raw, Ryan. And so the key for Deuce, if he's going to be a great quarterback at Notre Dame, it's going to require hard work, which Notre Dame has done a lot of due diligence on this over the last year to find out what kind of worker this kid is. And he's checked all the boxes according to everyone around him. But number 2, unlike most highly ranked quarterbacks, he's going to have to show a little patience because he is right now more about potential than he is about being an elite quarterback today. Like Bryce
Right.
Underwood right now, George McIntyre right now are much better quarterbacks than Deuce Knight. I don't know if there's a higher ceiling in the class than Deuce Knight. And that's the thing we've talked about. So if Deuce is willing to put in the work, which we think he will be, and be patient, then he's got a chance to be special. And that's what I think makes him just that perfect complement behind CJ Carr and Kenny Minchie.
I mean, he's a great. I think he has the potential to be the complete package, which is the best way to phrase it, right? Because the way you think of it, Brian, is you can't teach 6'4.5". You can't teach the arm strength that this kid has, and you can't teach him running in the 4.5s in the 40-yard dash, right? Like you can't teach those things. When you add all those three things together, that is why so many schools, Tennessee, Ole Miss, Alabama, all the SEC schools wanted Deuce Knight because he fits the mold of what you want physically at the quarterback position. Strong arm, athletic, tall, has a frame to put on a ton of weights. I mean, he has everything physically that you would want. The reason that I am super excited about Deuce Knight is that that there's some kids, though, every year that have all the tools, but then you talk to them and you're like, I'm not sure about that one, right? For various reasons. It's not even just a football IQ perspective. It could be a personal thing, it could be a leadership thing, it could be a combination of the three. Like those things could all exist. I've gotten to know Deuce Knight, and I will say this just from my conversations with him, is that he's very grounded, man. Like he's not a cocky kid, right? Which I think matters a little bit. He knows that he needs to improve, right? He knows that he's still a ways away. When he's talked about Gino Guidugli in the past, he talks a lot about, the relationship, obviously, but he also talks about like being able to sit down and talk ball with him, right? And get to understand the game at a more expansive level. So I think that he has potential to be the complete package, not just as an athlete, not just as a thrower of the football, but as a quarterback and as a student athlete at the University of Notre Dame. I think he has everything that you need to be really, really successful on the next level. No, obviously, the work needs to be put in, right? It needs to be put in. The next step is the most important step, always. But the kid from just a baseline of traits, athleticism, arm strength, football understanding, the just IQ in general. I mean, this is a really bright kid, right? Like there's a lot of kids that if Notre Dame wanted him out of the state of Mississippi, and this is no shade at Mississippi, they might not qualify. Like, let's be honest, right? But Deuce Knight is a great student. He's a great young man, and he fits what Notre Dame needs at the quarterback position and in the program in general.
I mean, look, Ryan, it's. I mean, look, there's a if you look at all the rankings, Mississippi has improved in recent years in ranking, but their improvement comes from being 50th at one point in time, right? I mean, that's just a fact. And so you always have to do your due diligence to find out if any kid can be an academic fit at Notre Dame. But that's part of the process is like you make certain, okay, you've got to be prepared to say, okay, this kid is from here. Most kids from there are this. So like when I recruited in Norfolk, Virginia and Virginia Beach and all those, I always had to, when I saw a great player, I always had to be like, okay, let me check the transcript first because I played in that area and I knew what the GPAs were a lot of my teammates, not all of them, but a lot of them were. I knew what the GPAs were of guys that I went against. And you just know some regions, it's just that tends to be an issue. But as you said, Deuce is not he's not the norm for a lot of places. I mean, he, like you said, and a lot of that comes from family background. I mean, Deuce has made comments in the past. Like if it was up to my mom, I would have committed Notre Dame a long time ago. You know what I mean? Like, very pro Notre Dame family because they understand the opportunities that Notre Dame can provide for Deuce on and off the field. And here's something else that doesn't hurt Notre Dame when it comes to recruiting quarterbacks like Deuce Knight and other big-time quarterbacks is what's happening with Sam Hartman right now. And I'm not talking about on the field. I'm talking about the NIL stuff and the dollars being thrown at Sam Hartman because he's the quarterback at Notre Dame. That stuff matters. That is huge. I promise you that recruits are aware of how much money Sam Hartman is getting. And that's having a big impact. And so, because that's going to be one of the big things with Deuce Knight, right? I hope he sticks. First of all, it's okay to just be happy. With every recruit, there's always this is the world we live in, right? Nobody's a guarantee to sign somewhere. But it's okay we can cross that bridge if it ever happens. But for right now, we're going to be happy that Deuce is in the class. But practically speaking, there is some reality that this is what's being thrown at quarterbacks in this NIL era.
Sure.
My understanding from some different people that I talk to is Deuce, like every other big time quarterback, is aware of those things. The family's aware of those things. But my understanding is the family has more of a long-term view of NIL opportunities, not the give me this amount of money now, more of the long-term view. And that's where what's going on with Sam Hartman is having such a huge impact on guys like Deuce Knight.
Yeah.
That, hey, I love Notre Dame. I love everything about Notre Dame. But yeah, this stuff's important to me. It's not going to be the driver in my decision, but it matters. But now Notre Dame can say, okay, look, we're not going to give you this, but look what our starting quarterback is doing. So you want to make millions of dollars being a college quarterback? Put in the work and become the starter at Notre Dame. And I promise you're going to get that kind of opportunity. And Deuce has always had a bit to me, right? And you know him even better than I do. Deuce has always had the times I've talked to him and people that I know that know him, he's always had a bit of a I want to be different type of kid. Like I'm not into the same things that he. You know who he reminds me a lot of? Reminds me a lot of Jeremiah Love, right? Who had millions thrown. I mean, had tons of money thrown at him and all that. But
kind of quiet and reserved. And yeah, I could see that.
Talks about things outside of just football. You know what I mean? Like he's just got a little bit of that. You know, there's something different about that kid. And Deuce reminds me a lot of Jeremiah Love. And no matter what people were throwing at Jeremiah, it just didn't faze him because he had bigger things in mind than that. And that's why I'm, you know, because I've done a lot of digging on this last couple weeks, Ryan. You know, because as Deuce kind of was like, hey, I wanted to push my commitment back. His little backstory, Deuce had said he wanted to commit over the summer. That didn't happen. There was the transfer to Tennessee, then the transfer back. And so there was a lot of, okay, is this kid falling into that same trap or is there something different? And then when you do digging on it and you realize why certain things happened, you're like, okay, yeah, I've been there. Because I went through that. I transferred to a high school in Florida my junior year down in Jacksonville to play for my high school coach who got a job in Jacksonville. And I thought I could do it, man. I'm going to go down there and do it. And by the end of the spring, I was like, dude, I miss my family. I want to go. I'm not ready yet. I thought I was ready to move away from home, but I wasn't ready yet. Well, a year later, I was ready, and I moved away from home and went to college. But it was a similar thing where it just kind of happened pretty quickly, you know, and you do your homework and you realize, okay, the concerns I had were alleviated.
Right.
I'm just going to be honest, because I did have those concerns the last month when he was pushing it back and he wants to visit here and he wants to visit there. Yeah. And when it came down to it, I think that how Notre Dame handled the quarterback situation with Bear, I think Notre Dame played this perfectly. Not that they played Deuce, but they got into a situation of, hey, we went through this a year ago with Dante Moore. Loved him. He kept telling us how much he loves Notre Dame and he's coming. He was silently committed and all this kind of stuff. And then push comes to shove, he ends up not coming. Right. And I think that spooked Notre Dame. Not spooked him a little bit, but they're like, hey, we love Deuce. Deuce is our guy, but we also like Bear Bachmeier a lot, and we can't afford to be left at the altar with nothing.
And for good reason. Bear Bachmeier is a good football player. So, yeah, man, if he would have ended up in the class, I think I would have been extremely happy, just like I'm happy today. But I think ultimately Deuce brings the higher upside comparative to, and not just Bear, like comparative to just about anybody in the 2025 class, you know? And ultimately, if Notre Dame has confidence in their development, and that's a position to position perspective, right? But if you have confidence in Jared Parker calling plays and Gino Guidugli developing quarterback position, then you feel really good about this one, right? Because this was not the easy decision for Deuce Knight. The easy decision would have been to go to Ole Miss or go play at Tennessee, right? Like that would have been the easy decision. He chose.
He had an Alabama offer. Yeah, I mean,
he could have easily stayed down south, and it would have been very easy for him. Him being a Southern kid, him having all those roots, and that's all he knows, right? But this was a different decision for him. He tweeted out the video about thinking big, right? And that's the difference. He wants something different. And I always thought he would ultimately want something different because he has also had family that has gone up and played at the University of Indiana, for instance, right? Like Ty Freifogel, his older brother. And so he's had those types of things. But I mean, you're right, Brian. Like anytime you have a kid that is in SEC country, in that territory, big time quarterback, NIL money, like all that stuff kind of put together, it's always going to be a tough pull getting a kid like
Sure.
Deuce Knight out of the South.
And it's
Always. But Notre
understandable
Dame
for
didn't
fans to
stop.
have that angst, Ryan. It is.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
am not hammering people for the reservations and all that kind of stuff. I get it. And
Yep.
like you said, though, that's why you did your due diligence. That's why I've done my due diligence. And all of the due diligence is following the due diligence that Notre Dame has done. And here's the big difference between Deuce Knight and Dante Moore more than anything.
Yep.
Dante did not have a push from home to Notre Dame. It was actually the exact opposite. He had a dad who didn't want Notre Dame because he was focused on other things. It's the
Right.
opposite with Deuce.
Yep.
Deuce has a support structure at home that's which is why it was hard for him to kind of leave last minute the way that he did. I don't think he was prepared for that. And again, Ryan, I can sympathize with that because I went through that as a junior in high school, and I made that similar decision, and it was tough. But at the end of the day, like you said, he's choosing the harder path. I hope you guys
Yep.
understand that. A kid from Lucedale, Mississippi, going to Notre Dame is choosing the harder path. He's not choosing the easy route. He could go to Auburn, not have to worry about going to class, play in Hugh Freeze's quarterback friendly system, and be fine. Go to play for Lane Kiffin and do all the
Oh,
type of things you can do
he
at
would
Ole
have been
Miss. And
sick in Lane's offense,
yeah,
man. He would have been sick in
and
there.
not have to worry about really the academic side the way that he will at Notre
Yep.
Dame. Deuce is taking the harder path. And then here's the other thing about it. Guys, Deuce knows who CJ Carr is. He knows who
Yes.
Kenny Minchie is. And it's
Yes.
like, yeah, but I'm Deuce Knight. I love
Right.
that about this group. I really do. And we've heard things about how CJ Carr was welcoming to Deuce when they've been on campus together, and you just love that. So big pickup, Ryan, and obviously tip of the cap to the Notre Dame staff for how they handle this whole thing of
Agreed.
not of being patient but not too patient, being willing to make a move on Bear but not do it in a way where you alienate Deuce. I really think they handled this thing beautifully, and it was not. Look, they didn't play Deuce with Bear. I mean, they genuinely like Bear Bryant or Bear Bachmeyer. Like if he decided he wanted to come and Deuce was like, "Nah, I'm willing to wait," they would have taken Bear Bachmeyer. But Deuce has been their number one guy for a long time, and that hasn't changed.
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
and also, this is a big first win for Gino Guidugli. He gets on the board in impressive. I mean, he gets kind of a half a point for keeping CJ Carr at Notre Dame,
Sure.
but Tommy Rees did the legwork to get CJ Carr to Notre Dame.
Yep.
This is
Yep.
the first big score for Gino Guidugli, and he kicked off his recruiting world, his recruiting success in Notre Dame in pretty impressive fashion. Not just the talent wise, Ryan, but going into the Deep South and getting this kind of kid. This isn't a kid that's from Michigan or Indianapolis or Chicago, Ryan. This is a kid in Mississippi, big time.
Well, and Brian, I think we need to also say that Gino Guidugli also put in so much work on the travels this offseason, right? On the recruiting trail. I mean, he was out seeing everyone. I mean, obviously that's hyperbolic, but like he saw so many different quarterbacks, a lot of good ones too, a whole lot of good ones. Bear Bachmeyer was one of those that he went out to see. And as soon as he saw him throw and talk to his coaches and everything, that was a player that they liked in the 2025 recruiting class as well. And so this is their guy, right? He's their guy. Gino Guidugli obviously has signed off on this one. Jared Parker signed off on this one. Marcus Freeman, the whole staff has signed off on this one. This is a kid that they absolutely wanted in the class. They got their guy ultimately, folks. Like that's, you want to talk about the end all be all? Like that's the end all be all. Like they got their guy. We'll see how it turns out and how he develops and if they're able to make the most of his opportunities and his talent. But ultimately, Notre Dame got the quarterback that they wanted, which is fantastic. And what great timing. Can we talk about the timing as well? You're about to play the biggest game of your season, about to have the biggest recruiting weekend probably of your entire season in Ohio State. And now you have your 2025 quarterback coming to campus committed for Notre Dame. So timing is great. This one was so sweet in every instance, right? You got a big time quarterback. He's in time to come now visit Ohio State as a committed quarterback of the 2025 class, help recruit a bunch of the players that are going to be on campus. We'll talk about that obviously more in the second section of this podcast, but just a massive victory for Notre Dame. And
Ryan, I want to
Congrats.
go
Hats
right to
off.
what, I want to go right to
Yeah.
what you were kind of saying there. It's important. Look what the impact CJ Carr has had on the 24 class. I mean, getting CJ Carr early is a big reason you have one of the best running back hauls in the country, if not the best. It's why you have one of the best receiving classes in the country. It's why you have a top 250 tight end. It's why the offensive line class has taken shape. And there's even some defensive guys that have talked about CJ when they've picked
Yeah.
Notre Dame, right? I
Oh
mean,
yeah, no doubt.
so when you get a big time quarterback to kick off your class, he's going to be a Pied Piper. I mean, kids want to play with him. I mean, I watched the Swamp Kings finally last week when I was in town. You know, my mom's at the hospital, and I'm like, well, like let me check this out. But you heard guys talk about like, well, once Tebow went to Florida, I was going to go to Florida. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
big time quarterbacks just have that type of effect, folks. And you get CJ, he's had that in the 24 class. You get Deuce to have that in the 25 class plus CJ, right? So now 25 commits. Taylor's like, dude, I got CJ Carr and Deuce Knight to potentially
Yeah.
work with. That's going to be huge. And to your point, Ryan, getting him to commit, not that they like pushed it, but the circumstance leading to him committing. And I was told he officially committed last night, is what I was told. Although I'll just say this. You guys now know what the topic of conversation was on my Friday phone call. I'm just leave it at that. Okay. I don't know if you had a chance to see that, Ryan, but I got a phone call in the middle of the mailbag on Friday.
I did,
It was about this quarterback stuff. And then obviously we saw how everything transpired over the weekend, and eventually Deuce makes his decision officially to come to Notre Dame. So, but having him on campus this weekend as a fresh commit is going to be big for Notre Dame. It's going to be really good. Because, I mean, I believe, isn't Taylor coming this weekend, I believe? Like,
it's possible.
Think,
They're a little last minute with their decision making just because of game time and all that type of stuff. But
But it being a late night game, like there's going to be a lot of big time kids on campus this weekend.
A lot of offensive linemen too. If anybody wants to predict Mr. Deuce Knight,
and it's going to be a busy recruiting week, Ryan. It's going to be a very busy recruiting week, and today is not the end of the busy week, but certainly a big step. And having him on campus as a commit, and I believe CJ is also going to be on campus this weekend. At least that's the plan as of now. CJ Carr is also going to be on campus this weekend. If you're a skill player in the 25 class and you're visiting this weekend, you're going to be walking around like to your left, you see Deuce, to your right, you see CJ, and you're like, yeah.
And then you're going to see Sam Hartman on the field. So like, the quarterbacks all around.
Yep, absolutely. So this is a big one, Ryan. It's a real big one. So let's talk a little bit about the impact in the class more formally. Notre Dame has really worked hard to get this commitment, and obviously they wanted it sooner rather than later because of the impact that it has. And so as we look more formally at the 25 class, not just this weekend, which we were just talking about, but more formally at the 25 class, what's interesting, Ryan, is I would argue that Notre Dame has consistently recruited offense better under Marcus Freeman than defense, I would argue is true, at least across the board, especially at skill positions. But the 25 class is very important for Notre Dame for a couple reasons, Ryan. Number one is it needs to be that third straight big-time class on offense. 22 had some really talented players, but they came up short in numbers at some skill positions, right? I mean, running back, you were good, but you only got Tobias Merriweather. You didn't get any other receivers. They were able to come out 23, get the big-time class in 23, got another one at 24 to really get on the level of the Ohio States and the Georgias and the teams like that. It really, to me, requires that 3 years in a row. I also think to even add more to that is the 25 class is absolutely loaded nationally. And you and I have talked about this. So being able to get a kid in Deuce Knight who ranks number 26 nationally by Rivals, he's the number one dual threat quarterback. He ranks number 28 nationally by On3. I think he's ranked as the number 4 quarterback. ESPN ranks in the top 100. He's their number 1 dual threat quarterback. When you get a kid like that in the class this early, Ryan, it's going to have a big impact. And that's why getting him is important, because they need a third straight big time offensive class. And getting a guy like Deuce Knight in the class is going to be huge to make that happen. And his family has shown a willingness to get him up here. I mean, Deuce has made like 4 visits to Notre Dame.
Yeah.
So his family's shown a willingness, like, hey man, we'll get you up there. Right. And so, and he'll obviously be up again this weekend for the Notre Dame Ohio State game. So this is a big one as far as needing to put together yet another big time class, and it won't shock me if we start seeing some receivers here over the next few months start to jump on board now that Deuce is in the class.
I mean, it was no surprise that Notre Dame was able to get the class in 2024 offensively after CJ Carr commits the class. I mean, obviously Cam Williams and Jack Larson were very short after that, but you don't think that having a quarterback like CJ Carr had effects on guys like Kedron Young and Aeneas Williams and Logan Saldate and Micah Gilbert? And I mean, he has an effect, guys. Like they want to come play for great quarterbacks.
Yeah. Cam Williams following CJ Carr here. I mean, that had a big impact. Jack Larson has said publicly that he's primarily his first main attraction to Notre Dame was playing with CJ Carr.
Sure.
Because everybody knew CJ was coming to Notre Dame.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, when Cam Williams visited for the Irish Invasion 2 years ago, Michigan was considered his leader at the time. And then obviously you spend a couple days with CJ and it was over.
Yeah.
So yes, to your point, like you added some guys. I felt the need to get CJ in there too, or Cam Williams in there too, because that was a big one where those guys said, "Hey, that's my guy. I want to play with CJ Carr."
Yeah. Well, and then now you have the opportunity for getting Deuce Knight in the class. When there's only 2 other commits in the class, you're now up to number 3. I mean, I think that you now have the chance to, Taylor, come on down, right? Like it's pretty easy sell. Cooper Perry, if that's a guy that you're going to push for. Dalen McCutcheon, if that's a guy. Derek Meadows, James Flanagan. Like let's get the show on the road, right? I mean, Owen Strebig, you've been to campus now a million times, so when's that going to happen?
Right.
It's an easy sell.
Exactly. So Ryan, let's also kind of talk a little bit about Deuce as a player, and so we'll kind of dive into the film room next. And to begin though, the thing for me that I look at when I think of Deuce is this is a kid that is right now more about, and there was like a comment in the chat about, I'm not sure how high I am on Deuce, and that's fair because Deuce so far has not put up monster numbers so far in high school, and then obviously I don't know if he's not going to play the entire year, if he has to sit out, I don't know, a portion of the season. I'm still not sure on whether he's going to be able to play for George County this year, but it's very fair to say, hey, he hasn't produced a ton. I get that, and that's going to put a lot of importance on him as a senior, really being able to go out there and produce in that fashion. But here's the reality of it. This is an elite talent.
Yep.
And that's what Notre Dame saw. And I'll be honest with you, I had a lot of the same questions people had until I saw him this summer. When you see him with the 7-on-7 stuff this summer, you see a natural thrower. You really do, that you didn't really see on sophomore film. You see a natural thrower. And that's something that really kind of sold me on him. Like, yeah, that's my guy. Because, early on, I liked Deuce's talent, but I also liked KJ Lacey a ton. I like George McIntyre. And you're like, is Deuce is kind of a run, throw, ground film, but, big arm, but is he really going to fit the Notre Dame offense? And then you see what he did this summer, and you just see how comfortable he was sitting in the pocket, going through reads, getting the ball off. And you say, okay, this is a kid that's got a lot of those tools. So, that's the thing for me is this is a kid that is right now more about the ceiling than he is the floor. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the great thing is that we're talking about a kid that's a 2025 recruit that's still a junior in high school, right? So you have 1 year of high school maturation, and then you're going to go into college. You're going to have the ability to work with Gino Guidugli on a day-to-day basis, have the ability to work with Jared Parker on a day-to-day basis. And then from there, it's about how quickly you develop over the next year to 2 or whatever the time frame will be from developing from a backup quarterback, a bushy-eyed, young man who, we saw it with Kenny Minchie this spring, right? Where it's like, Kenny Minchie, you're just getting him acclimated slowly, right? Like, let's get him slowly. Every day you get a little bit better, a little bit more confident. It's the same process that somebody like Deuce Knight's going to go through, right? It's just about how quickly that he can mature to that level. But, the rawness for a 2025 quarterback is, a fair thing, but usually a pretty consistent thing, right? Like there aren't a lot of 2025 quarterbacks I look at and like, yeah, that guy's ready-made day one type of quarterback, right? I mean, you're betting on athleticism and upside a lot in these conversations. And again, as long as your development is good, there's no reason that Deuce Knight shouldn't be that guy eventually. When it happens, we'll see as he develops, but he's got a lot of talent to work with. There's no question.
Yep. All right, let's dive into the film, Ryan, of Deuce Knight, and we'll start right here. So the first thing that people notice, obviously, he's a left-handed quarterback. But he's a tall, long, skinny kid. You said it earlier, Ryan, and I think you're correct. He has got the frame to be well over 200 pounds. I mean, I'm not worried about the frame. But the second thing you notice, this kid has an absolute bazooka for an arm. He is thrown across his body there, and the ball goes about 40 yards. I mean, he has one of the easiest power arms I've seen in a long time. Like, he is very effortless as a football thrower, and the ball explodes out of his hand. Like that right there. That's not as easy of a throw as Deuce makes it seem. And he does it like almost like he's throwing a slant route.
Yep. His eyes are front side too, and he kind of comes back to the middle of the field there, which is nice. A little bit of eye manipulation. But yeah, man, that arm is just jumps off his hand. Like the ball just jumps, right? Like he's got all the tools. And the thing I love is that like you're going to see a lot of the running highlights and stuff. But like if you look at his numbers from his sophomore year, he's not a kid that's utilized that much in the run game, really. Like this is a passing quarterback that also has dual threat ability. Like I think we need to just have an understanding of that. It's not like he ran for 1,500 yards last year. I mean, he ran for like 300 or 400 yards, I think.
It was like
he just did it with like 8 yards
a
carry or something like that.
488 is what he finished with. The thing I like too, Ryan, is Deuce is not, we had talked earlier about Tim Tebow, right? He's not Tim Tebow. He's not Vince Young. And what I mean by that is somebody just asked about Vince Young. Is those guys were guys you built your run game around them. There will be things Deuce can do. That's another effortless throw. Deuce will be able to do things like on the read zone game. Eventually, maybe even some power read stuff. But Deuce is not a guy that I'm building my running game around. I'm using him as a complement if teams are being disrespectful to our backside stuff, right? And you talk about a guy that's you can run your inside zone stuff with, you don't always have to worry about bringing your backside tight end all the time around like Notre Dame does now, because you can pull it. Deuce can pull it and take it out the back door. There's things you can do with that. But as you were pointing to, Ryan, he's not a guy that's a runner that you're going to have to teach to throw the football. Sure. He is a quarterback that wants to stay in the pocket and wants to make plays with his legs. And you can even see it here, Ryan. And we saw it too in some of the early junior season games, like against IMG and in the second game where they were playing against Saraland. He had that one play where he was scrambling around, looked like he was going to run it, and then he just pulls up and throws it into the end zone, right? Like when he's moving around, Deuce wants to be able to throw the football. And I think that's a big part of his game is, yes, he's going to be dynamic in the pocket. He's going to be able to scramble for some big plays, but he's a kid that wants to sit in the pocket and throw the football. He just knows that if you give me a crease or if I got to move around, I can also hurt you in that regard. But like right here, for example, steps into the pocket. His eyes never come off downfield, right? Like you can see it, Ryan. His eyes never come up off downfield, and he's able to, boom, flip that ball over the top, right? Yep. And going an opposite direction of where he's supposed to throw as well, which is impressive. That's a rope right there.
There's no limitations on what you can do with him in the passing game too, as far as if you're a team that likes to move the pocket, if you're a team that likes to run heavy RPO stuff, if you want to push the ball vertically, he has all the passing upside to fit any system if you need him to, right? Like there's no route concept he can't do. There's no little wrinkle that he can't run. He has all the necessarily passing prowess to develop into that type of kid.
And, you talk about the arm strength, Ryan. We talked about this the first time we watched him. He has elite arm strength, like elite arm strength. The other thing that I talk about, too, that I always get nervous when I see 6'4" and 6'5" guys that have very long arms. And Deuce looks a lot like a two-guard, like a high school two-guard, right, in basketball. Long arms and all that. He's got a little bit of that arm, that length that Trevor Lawrence and Hendon Hooker had, which can be a problem for some kids. But for Deuce, he's pretty compact with it, Ryan, which is something that I like. And he's got pretty good arm speed getting the ball through the zone, which can be a concern for long-armed quarterbacks. Deuce has not shown that problem for me in high school.
No, it's not. It's a relatively short release. It's not elongated. It's not one where it's just like that ball is going to take forever to get there. I mean, like there's some guys, I remember like Byron Leftwich was one, right, where it was just like that. It just takes forever for the ball to get out, and not forever as in like he doesn't have a strong arm, forever as in he just has a really long arm that his release just takes forever. Like we've seen guys like that.
It was lumbering to get through it. Yeah.
Yep. And that ball, that ball explodes off his hand, man. Explodes.
Byron Leftwich is that way. But, another one is, Tim Tebow is that way. Had a very long release, and it wasn't really fast. And
Yep.
that's something that hurt them in the National Football League. That won't be an issue for Deuce. That right there is a perfect example. Like, this is a really quick, compact plant, get the ball out, great ball placement, touchdown type of throw.
Yep.
Now, his high school team doesn't really tailor to that, but when you see it, Deuce is pretty good about it. Like, right there, little play action, quick slant. He's getting hit in the face, boom, right in the money, gets the ball out. You see those things. And as I said earlier, one of the things that really sold me on Deuce being a fit at Notre Dame as a player, not as a young man, was watching this summer, because we did get to see him do more of just sitting in the pocket, going through his progressions, going through his reads, getting the ball out. And it really kind of played to what this young man can do. But like right there, like, he's moving around. There's no panic here. It's almost kind of like he's just kind of, okay, I'm just naturally moving around, keep my eyes downfield. There's like no, I don't want to say urgency, because I don't think that that's the word I'm looking for, because that can be a negative, but it's just, there's a calm, right? His eyes stay downfield. Let me find my guy, boom, snap it off quickly and get the ball out to your receiver.
It's a dangerous throw too if you don't have a strong arm back to the middle of the field like that. Like, it's not a throw that I would recommend a lot of quarterbacks making, but he has, again, it's the God-given tools that he has. I mean, there just aren't many quarterbacks, and this is 2025 class, obviously, but I mean, 2023, 2024 that have this much physical gifts. Like, they just really don't. I mean, he has, when people lost their minds over Nico that went to Tennessee, right? Like, this kid has a similar-ish skill set to that as far as the arm strength, athleticism. And he might even be a little bit more athletic than Nico was at the same age, right?
He's more smooth than Nico is, and probably a tad faster. I'll say this too. That was one of my knocks on Nico, was he had a very long throwing motion. That's something that Josh Heupel, and that's why I think going to Tennessee is a great move for him, because of what Josh Heupel was able to do with Hendon Hooker in that regard. But yes, I like that comparison, Ryan. I do. I like that comparison between those two, as far as like long and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I like that one. I like that one. That's another just easy rope that he has. And here's the thing, you can do these things, right? Like, it's sometimes you get these athletic young quarterbacks and like, I got to prove that I'm a passer, so I won't run. And Deuce is not afraid to run. He's not afraid to use his legs at all. It's just that it's more complimentary to it, which I love, but you can throw in some wrinkles like this. But like, honestly, like, this is great in high school. I don't know that I want Deuce, as skinny as he is, even when he does fill out, to run a 6'5" quarterback, to run a ton of this, right? At 6'5", like Tim Tebow was 6'2". He had a lower frame. He could kind of lower his shoulder. I don't know that I'm going to have Deuce doing a whole lot of that, but it's nice to be able to do it as a wrinkle, and it really helps keep teams honest. But Deuce in college is going to be a guy that I believe is going to do most of his big plays running from the passing structure. That's what I think. Like, plays like this. This is what I think we'll see more of in college from Deuce, as opposed to the designed runs.
Right. Well, I think that the great thing about him too is that there have been too many Notre Dame quarterbacks in recent years where you knew that there were parts of the field that you just didn't have to worry about consistently, right? Whether that is the deep ball, whether that is running ability, that type of thing, right? Deuce Knight is a player where, even if it's not perfect, you have to respect every level of the field, because he'll throw the ball over your head. He'll hit the intermediate routes. He'll throw with anticipation to the middle of the field with velocity. He will run the football as well. So those things all together.
A 15-yard stop route, Ryan. You know what I mean? Like, that he just throws like it's a hitch.
Defensive coordinator's worst nightmare, man. A quarterback that can affect every level of the field and with his legs. And that's what Deuce has the potential to be at the next level, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's funny. You said he's a defensive coordinator's worst nightmare. Well, what I wrote in my article today, and I wrote on Friday when I wrote how this important period at quarterback recruiting that Notre Dame is entering, where I talked about him and Bear, is, yes, he's a defensive coordinator's worst nightmare, but he's a quarterback coach's dream, because he has all the intangibles and all the physical talent. The only quote unquote knock on him is he's left-handed. And that is a real thing, because again, it's the ball comes at you differently. There's a reason why in baseball, some left-handed hitters can't hit left-handed pitchers, because it comes at you from a different arm slot than a right-handed pitcher. So that'll be something that guys will have to get used to. But It's more of that, Ryan. It's that right there. It's something that requires people to get used to. It's not something that is a permanent hindrance.
Oh, I hate lefties. I hate
yeah,
them. So
but
yeah, I get it.
but when you have caught 1,000 passes from them, it's fine.
Yeah.
And then obviously it's how do you structure your offensive line if he's the starter? But like we're a ways from that. I'm not worried about that right now. You know what I mean? That'll kind of take care of itself. Let's let Deuce get through his high school career, and then we'll figure out how you're going to structure the offensive line. But it has to be noted as a lefty, it does come with some things that are going to require some getting used to from receivers, but they'll be able to if they throw with them long enough. That's the reality of it. If he ever does earn the starting job.
Well, I mean, we talked about this a little bit, right? Like this isn't as much film analysis, but he's also a player that is a lot different than what Notre Dame has had, right? As far as style, one, but more than anything, I mean, he's the third Mississippi recruit for Notre Dame since 1996, right? Or since 1995, excuse me. He's the first Mississippi quarterback to come to Notre Dame since Jarius Jackson in the late 90s. He's also When's the last time Notre Dame had a left-handed quarterback?
Malik Zaire since 2013.
Oh, yeah, Malik
right?
Zaire.
Yeah, that's been a minute. That's been a minute. Yeah.
It's been a minute. I mean, I literally probably the second lefty in the last 30 years. I don't know. Like, it's been a long time.
Played. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I can't think of a lot of other lefties that played quarterback at Notre Dame, at least not on scholarship.
I really think that like the presence of him in the class, because we talked about it, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit more in the second section, right? Like how much that means, especially during the Ohio State visit. It's big time because he's a 6'4.5" talented quarterback from the South. Like that matters, right? But it's also, what does Notre Dame preach so much, Brian? Be different. Think different. Think big.
Think big.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, is there a better example of that than Deuce Knight? He had every reason not to come to Notre Dame. Every single reason. Big time quarterback from the South. First quarterback from Mississippi since the late 90s. A left-handed quarterback has not been an ordinary thing at Notre Dame. Like, you just haven't had a lot of Deuce Knights in Notre Dame's career, Notre Dame's history, excuse me, come to the University of Notre Dame. And I think if you are preaching think big, right, you say, hey, 2025, come think big. Look at our quarterback in this class. He is the ultimate example of a kid that chose to do something completely different, out of his comfort zone, and be different, right? And that's how Notre Dame is going to get back to the top of the totem pole, right? If they're able to get back to that and win national championships, it's only because they convince players and talent that different is the way to go. It's not the easy thing is for him to go to Alabama. The easy thing is for him to stay down south.
Go to Auburn.
But that's not right. But that's not going to fulfill his potential in his eyes, right? And I think that convincing players like this out of the norm, the guys that are not the ordinary player that you get at Notre Dame, that will speak volumes for the rest of the class, to the future of Notre Dame football, that a player like this said, you know what? I'm not going to take the easy route. I'm going to go be different. I think different is a big, big thing.
Ryan, I think too, if we've talked about this in the past as well, where you need the trailblazers at a place like Notre Dame. You need, that's why Southern schools recruit so hard against Notre Dame and negatively recruit against Notre Dame, because they don't want to see a Deuce Knight come up north and succeed. They don't want to see a Keon Keeley come up north and succeed. They don't want that pathway to be opened up to where all these kids say, hey, look, I can go home. I can go away from home for 3 to 4 years and get a great degree and play for championships and make a lot of NIL money and get and because Notre Dame has something that none of those schools down south have. They can say all they want. Our education is that none of those schools down south, unless you're going to Vanderbilt, can compete with Notre Dame when it comes to what these kids can get from an academic and from a networking and from a, an education standpoint. And that's a big reason, is they don't want what happened in the Lou Holtz era to happen now, which is once Notre Dame won in '88 and they started putting out a bunch of kids in the first and second round of the NFL draft, there's no coincidence Notre Dame had 3 straight years where they had the number 1 recruiting class in the country, right? And you go back and look at where a lot of those guys were coming from, Ryan. They were they had the advantage back then of having Jerome Bettis's and Todd Lights and Ricky Waters and Tony and Rocket Ismails from the north. But you go look at those classes, they were getting a lot of kids from Florida, a lot of kids from South Carolina. Tony Rice was from South Carolina. He was pre the championship team, obviously, as far as when he was a recruit. But the point is, Derek Brown was from Florida. They got a lot of Louisiana kids, Texas kids. You know, it opened up the door to get Jarius Jackson out of the state of Mississippi. So they were able to open up that pipeline, and kids could say, hey, I can go up to Notre Dame. I can be a Southern quarterback and go up to Notre Dame and win a national championship, because Tony Rice did it. You know what I mean? And they don't want that to happen again. And so that's why, if a kid like Deuce coming to Notre Dame and being successful does open that pipeline. It's why it's so important to get some of those kids from down south and have them be successful, because it shows other kids like, hey, I can go there. I can go there and thrive. Like what Jaden Greathouse is doing right now is not being lost on Texas recruits. It's not. And that's important. That's very important.
Especially with his reputation that he brings to the table.
Right. And that's also something that Deuce Knight brings to the table, Ryan, and the danger that it presents for the SEC. And look, right now, the last thing they need to happen is that, because it hasn't been great for the SEC the first 3 weeks of the college football season, right? It's been a little bit tough sledding for the SEC on the field.
Man,
so
Alabama, after losing week 1, has a barn burner against South Florida this past weekend. So it hasn't been great. Has not been great.
They've got a loss. You've got LSU got stomped by Florida State. South Carolina got stomped by North Carolina.
And then Georgia came back and struggled against South Carolina for a long time after South Carolina just got manhandled the week before by an ACC team. So man, it hasn't been great.
Absolutely. So it's fun to watch, man. It's fun to watch. So Ryan, we did have a couple questions about Deuce that I want us to be able to get to now before I leave and turn over the show to you. And you talk about Ohio State, but Charlie Weiss's last belt, Luba Super Chat. Thank you, Charlie. He says, hey, Urban, there's your 5-star quarterback, signed Marcus Freeman. There's your second 5-star quarterback. I mean, let's not forget, like, Deuce is a dude, but let's not forget this is now back-to-back years on my board. Actually, I don't have Deuce as a 5-star yet. He's still a little too raw for me. 5-star upside grade, sure. But I have him as a 4.5-star top 50 guy right now, Ryan, because he does have a lot to work on. And the fact that he's not going to – we haven't seen a lot of him as a junior. I liked what I saw from him against IMG and Saraland. It showed he has a lot to work on.
I thought he looked great against IMG, man. I thought he looked really good against IMG.
He had how many drop ball hits? He threw for what? I think he threw for 259 in that game.
And he was like 25 of 37. Like, it was a good percentage.
He had like 5 or 6 balls just flat out dropped by his receivers. I thought he showed a lot of, and he showed toughness because they were hitting him a lot in that game as well. Same with Saraland. Like, he was taking a beating against Saraland, and he kept battling through it. So, but this is 2 years in a row that Notre Dame has landed a 5-star quarterback or a guy with 5-star upside on my board. I believe Deuce is eventually going to be a 5-star quarterback. CJ wasn't a 5-star as a sophomore either for me. Deuce doesn't have a whole lot of room for improvement, Ryan, to jump to a 5-star on my board. He may already be one on yours. But he'll end up being that most likely, and then there'll be 2 years in a row. 2 years in a row, you've definitely have a 5-star upside guy, no doubt about that. So, and that's the big thing. I mean, look, and Coach Meyer, what he said wasn't wrong. I mean, we can get mad about it because he's a D-bag and he just says and does a lot of stupid things, but he's not wrong. Notre Dame shouldn't have to go to the portal for a kid like Sam Hartman, right? You should be developing your quarterbacks. I think he made a little bit too much of it, and like, nobody else does this. And I'm like, well, Alabama won a title with a transfer quarterback.
LSU,
Jacob Coker. LSU won one. Oklahoma's entire offense under Lincoln Riley was built on transfer quarterbacks, right? I mean, so I mean, it's part of the game, right? So
Ohio State just had a transfer quarterback, Justin Fields. Yeah, exactly. So
it's a different era. But I mean, yes, Notre Dame needs to recruit and develop quarterbacks better. There's no question, and they are under Marcus Freeman. And Deuce continues that. That is super chat from AST12321. Is Deuce Knight a gap closer or a gap eraser? He's a gap closer for me, Ryan. He's not like a gap eraser.
You need the on fields, like, you need to prove it now with a couple of these kids, and then it starts to get to that point. Yeah.
Or he'd have to be like a Trevor Lawrence type prospect.
That's fair.
And he's not. Like, and what I mean by that is it would be a gap closer or a gap eraser from a program prestige and recruiting standpoint. Like, if he was that, but that guy doesn't come along very often to me, and so, but no, he's a gap closer. CJ's a gap closer. Kenny Minchie's a gap closer. And that's the whole point, Ryan, is you've now landed 3 years in a row of talented quarterbacks. Now you got to keep them all and get them all here. That's part of the process. But I mean, the reason it's important is, number one, depth, but number two, sometimes guys don't pan out. Right? I thought Tyler Buckner was going to be a stud. I thought Phil Dracovic was going to be a stud. Sometimes guys don't pan out for different reasons. Injury, you went to some private quarterbacks coach who completely ruined you. Seen that happen a couple times in Notre Dame. You have a coach that didn't recruit you, that doesn't necessarily believe in you the way the previous coach did, which happened with Phil Dracovic, going from, Mike Denbrock wanting him, and then, maybe Chip Long and that staff not liking him as much and all those type of things. But for whatever reason, those guys didn't pan out. And the problem is you didn't have the kind of talent around them that you needed. I mean, Tyler Buckner was surrounded by Drew Pine and Steve Angeli and Brendan Clark. So Tyler Buckner didn't pan out, got to go to the portal, right? Whereas the other schools are like, well, and that's what's hurting Bama, in my opinion. They didn't recruit the quarterback position as well as they had in the past. I mean, Jalen Milroe's not that kind of guy to me. Ty Simpson's a good player, but I always thought he was a little overrated, to be honest with you. I'll tell you this right now, speaking of Alabama, Ryan, they're another loss away from going to Dylan Lonergan, in my opinion, which they should. If you lose another game and you got 2 losses, you're not a playoff team. You might as well turn over the keys to the young stud and develop him, in my opinion. So wouldn't surprise me at all. But yeah, Notre Dame is in a great place. Right now, Ryan, who would you trade quarterback recruiting with right now around the country? I mean, the list is small right now. Yeah. And that list does not include Georgia. It does not include Ohio State. It does not include Alabama right now. It doesn't.
No.
So
I agree.
It's been fun. All right, let's see. It's from Justin Fleming. The super chat. It says, love the fact that Deuce committed Notre Dame, but I wonder, with his transfer situation up in the air, will not playing this year hurt his development? And Ryan, I think that's a fair question, but I believe he is going to play at some point in time this year. I just don't know when.
Right. Yeah. It's like the weird thing, because like things also are things like there's different rules, Justin, from like state to state, right? Like I remember at one point when I was coaching high school football, there's the 30-day rule, right, in the off season. I think at some point New Jersey was like, if you transfer schools during the school year, like I'm pretty sure you weren't eligible anymore, right? But I think that most are that way. So yeah, when will he be back on the field for George County? It's a great question, one that I don't have 100% of a understanding of. But as soon as we do, Justin, we'll be able to pass it along. But yeah, I think that it's just weird sometimes with every state I feel like has different rules in that regard, which just kind of makes it funky to kind of follow along and understand. So
yep.
It's also a kid going from one state to the other. So like that's weird, right? I don't know. Just a lot of stuff there.
All right, next Deuce question here, Ryan, from Rob Osgood. He says, great news, guys. Love the fact Indy got his commitment early. What does this show to other recruits? Thank you for all your hard work.
Well, I mean, I talked about it earlier, Rob. I think one thing is that it shows you that picking Notre Dame doesn't have to be the typical what you would envision as a Notre Dame football player, right? Like I think that shows you that Notre Dame can touch just about anywhere. I mean, we talked about the impact they had in 2023 in the state of Texas. You talk about what they've done in 2024 in the state of North Carolina. You talk now in 2025, your first 3 commits, and your 3 committed players currently are from Florida, and Mississippi. Doesn't happen too often in Notre Dame, right? Like that's a little different. That's different right there. It is. So I think that it shows the rest of the players in the country. One, you have a big-time quarterback, a big-time talent. That's an easy sell for Notre Dame. And the other side of it is that Notre Dame's recruiting a little bit differently, right? It's just a little bit of a different formula, I believe, as far as where you are prioritizing, where you're happy with going, where you're okay with going, where you are going to kind of pitch your tents to really go closing some players. So I think that it is a great example. And it is a potential big move for 2025 recruiting, because Notre Dame's off to a good start there, obviously, a great start after today. But now it's about selling it, right? Sell this class. And if you follow Deuce Knight on Twitter, he made his announcement, and he already seems to be recruiting on Twitter, right? So it's going to be an easy recruitment for a lot of players to want to follow Deuce Knight, because I think that not only is he a big-time player, a big-time quarterback, which is so important, it's obviously a different type of demographic that maybe Notre Dame's pulling to, which I think is a big thing for hopefully making changes, right? Like Notre Dame got into this little settling point, I think, for a little bit in their history there, in recent years, where it's like, we're good, But what's going to take us over the top? I think being different is the way you get over the top, and I think that's what Notre Dame's trying to do right now.
Jojo Pineda is excited, Ryan. He says, awesome news this morning. I can't believe it. Yeah, it's big news. And like here's my thing with this one, Ryan, is I've always felt like Deuce loved Notre Dame. But I had legitimate questions about when push came to shove, would he be willing to make the decision to leave the South? I mean, that was always in the back of my mind a concern. And when he pushed his decision back and back and back, it only enhanced my fears about that, because it's one thing to love Notre Dame. It's another thing to love Notre Dame enough to say, I'm leaving my home area. I'm going to go there. And as we found with Notre Dame over the years, it's been tougher with southeastern kids than it has been with California kids and Texas kids and, North Carolina kids. Those really southeastern guys, it's just been harder to get those kids to be willing to leave home and come up to Indiana. It's just been harder. So that was always a concern of mine. So, when and I'd almost kind of in my mind in the last couple weeks almost convinced myself, like, or not convinced myself, but prepared myself for like Bear being the quarterback in the class. Like I just had kind of said, well, and that'll be fine. Bear's a good football player. I like Bear. But Deuce was always the guy that you said, and Bear has a higher floor than Deuce. I've said this on the board. I said the Bear has a higher floor than Deuce, but the question, the comment was always, but Deuce has a much higher ceiling. And to me, in the 25 class, Ryan, it was imperative that after getting Carr and Minchie in back-to-back classes, that the focus be on the elite ceiling kid as opposed to another high floor kid. That was my thoughts on that, Ryan. I'm not sure how you felt about that.
It makes sense. I mean, I think that you can mix and match the trajectories of players now, right? Because you now have a player in CJ Carr in 2024 that you look at it and say, this kid will probably be ready to go relatively early in his college career. So you could be a little bit more patient with the 2025 quarterback. And I think for me, it's also, again, I mean, you always want to raise the ceiling as a program, right? And Deuce Knight raises the ceiling, right? Like it's a little bit more of a volatile projection, the comparative to maybe a CJ Carr, for instance, right? Because it's not, the floor is steadily lower, but at the end of the day, if you are able to develop him properly, then I think Deuce Knight could potentially take your program from a really good program to a great program, to a great program, to an elite program. Like he has that type of talent that I don't think can be ignored.
Question here, Ryan. This is from a super chat from Tom Connor. Thank you, Tom. He says, is Anthony Richardson a good comp? My answer would be no. I think they're very different. I think that the only comparison would be the rawness, but just style of play, body type. I think they're much different, in my opinion.
Agree.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Richardson's 235, 240
He was
pounds.
big coming out of high school. He was like
physically dense kid. Yeah.
And he was like that coming out too, right?
Yeah. Well, I think the body types are just different. I think that the throwing motions are very different. I mean, I'm not even talking about like righty versus lefty. Like, I just think they're different just in general. I think that Anthony Richardson is a guy that you want to run a lot of quarterback run game with him because he's not a great athlete. He's not an elite athlete. Like, he's a historical athlete. Like, that's what Anthony Richardson is. Like, he's one of the best athletes we have ever seen at the quarterback position. I wouldn't say I would necessarily say that Deuce is that. I mean, he's a great athlete, but like, is he one of the best athletes we've ever seen at the quarterback position? Like, it's just a little bit too much, right? So I think it's just a little bit of a different package. I think you made like a Hendon Hooker comp before. I think that one makes a lot more sense. He might even be a little bit faster than Hendon Hooker, but I think body type wise, throwing motion wise, I think that one makes a little bit more sense.
Wanting to be a pocket guy. Hendon was always athletic, but Hendon always wanted to be a pocket guy. But Hendon also was able to do a lot of damage with his legs at Tennessee. He was more than willing to use his legs to make plays. I always thought that was something I appreciated about Hendon Hooker, because he wasn't that guy that just stubbornly said, no, I'm a pocket guy. I'm a pocket guy. I'm a pocket guy. He was like, I'm more willing to go and run it. I mean, last year he didn't run it quite as much because of the injuries, but he ran for over 1,600 or 600 yards and 5 touchdowns in his first year as a starter at Tennessee. And didn't even start the season as a starter. Didn't take over till his first start, I believe, was Tennessee Tech. He came off the bench against Pitt, I believe. I believe Joe Milton started the season as the quarterback, and he only threw one pass in the opener. He came off the
Shocker
bench
that Joe Milton is not
I
good.
know,
Who
right?
would have
Who knew?
thought?
Who knew? Exactly. Who knew? But then comes out. So like the last 2 years as a starting quarterback at Tennessee, despite only starting like I think 20, maybe 22 games, 23 games at the most, he had over 1,000 yards rushing and 10 touchdowns or 9 touchdowns. I think the last 2 years. Let me go look real quick, Ryan. What is rushing numbers? We had 5 and 5. Yeah, so 10. So 10. I was correct. He had 10 touchdowns the last couple years. So yeah, Hendon Hooker was a guy that was more than willing to be a passer. And I think the mistake that Justin Fuente made is Justin Fuente kept thinking he was a dual threat quarterback. And the smartness of Josh Heupel is Josh Heupel treated him as an athletic passing quarterback.
Oh, well, Justin Fuente was just like Hendon Hooker and what was it, Quincy Patterson. You're the same guy. We're just going to do the same exact stuff with you. It's
exactly.
like, no,
and they
it's
weren't.
not the same thing.
Whereas Josh Heupel realized I have a pocket passer with a big arm that can also run. Yeah. And that's when Hendon Hooker started to flourish. And that's, to me, that's who Deuce Knight is, where Anthony Richardson is what Justin Fuente thought Caleb Patterson or Quincy Patterson was. Right. Yeah. And he wasn't. Anthony Richardson is a way better quarterback, but like that's who he thought Quincy Patterson was. He never quite appreciated what Hendon Hooker was. Josh Heupel did eventually. Because again, he didn't in first, let's be honest. That's why he started Joe Milton. You know what I mean? But he eventually realized what he had and they went with it, and it was impressive. But yeah, he is a kid that likes to throw the football, that also can do a lot of damage with his legs. If you want a Notre Dame comp, it's the running usage of an Ian Book. Right now, Deuce Knight's a way better prospect than Ian Book, but Ian Book was a guy that ran for a lot of yards in his career at Notre Dame. Very rarely were those yards coming from designed runs. You'd have the occasional quarterback draw, capable like third and short outside run, but most of his damage as a runner at Notre Dame came as a scrambler and when pass plays broke down. I think Deuce will be the same way. He's a kid that is going to use his legs to do a lot of damage, but I don't think you're going to have him doing as many designed runs and quarterback powers as you did with Deshaun Kaiser, who was 240 pounds. And that's kind of the way that I look at it. So I think he'll be doing stuff in the run game more like how they used Everett Golson, who's smaller, read zones, get what you can get, dip out of bounds. But when you're making plays with your legs, it's scrambling around and those type of things is what it's going to be. That's how I see Deuce. Last couple here, Ryan, before we take our little, we're going to take a little brief intermission, put up the song and the logo, and then Ryan and I will kind of prep for the next section. And then Ryan will handle all that. It's going to be a lot of fun. Jared Venier with Super Chat. Thank you, Jared. Very, very much. Folks, it's becoming a whole lot easier to be a Notre Dame fan these days. Go Irish Deuces. There's some people that are fighting it, Ryan. Like they just don't want to completely buy in because they don't want to have their hearts broken. And I get it. I do. But enjoy it, folks. It's fun. Yeah. It's a lot of fun. I mean, Notre Dame's just picked up a big-time quarterback. They're getting ready to play a top 10 battle at home against Ohio State. They're it's okay to enjoy it. Sit back and enjoy the ride. Sit back and enjoy the ride.
Oh, man, if they beat Ohio State too, folks, then get ready, guys. We're heading, man. We're getting there.
Here's an interesting Ryan. Charlie Weiss's last belt loop. With having Deuce, can you see Ryan Williams and Jamie French or any other top receivers rethinking their decisions? Deuce seems like a great magnet for Southern kids.
Ryan Williams, I wouldn't say so, Charlie, just because he's an Alabama kid, right? He's an Alabama kid going to Alabama like he's a Saraland kid, right? So I wouldn't say that one. Jamie French, it's always possible. I mean, he's going to Bama too, but I mean, he's a kid that gave Notre Dame a serious look. Like Ryan Williams didn't give Notre Dame seriously.
Didn't Jamie French take 2 visits, and his brother played at Pitt? So his brother, like Ty Frofogle, his brother
similar to Deuce Knight,
right?
Similar
played
to
in
Deuce
the North.
Knight, so
here's the thing too about Ryan Williams is if he's going to flip, he's going to follow a quarterback. He's going to follow his high school teammate KJ Lacey to Texas. That's where he would go if he's going to follow a quarterback. But yeah, the Jamie French one. What's helped by that is just watching Alabama the last 2 weeks. Yeah. It's like when was the last time you could say this? If you're a quarterback or receiver, why would you want to go to Bama over Notre Dame? When was the last time we were able to say that, Ryan? But that's the truth right now. I mean, that's the truth right now. When you look at those two teams, who would you rather be, a receiver at Alabama right now or a receiver at Notre Dame right now? Who would you rather be?
You're not
Because
wrong.
here's what I know. Currently, Notre Dame is averaging 304.3 passing yards per game. Alabama is averaging 196. They rank 101st. Notre Dame ranks 21st. Notre Dame currently ranks 5th in college football behind two option teams, mind you. They rank 5th in college football in yards per attempt. Alabama ranks 57th in yards per attempt. Alabama in 3 games has 5 touchdowns and 2 picks. Notre Dame has Notre Dame, I should say, has 15 touchdowns and 0 picks. And right now, Notre Dame's offense ranks 3rd in pass efficiency on the season, and Alabama ranks 70th. So yeah, right now it's a good time to be. It's a good time to be Notre Dame. And by the way, Bama ranks 108th in completion percentage, and Notre Dame currently ranks 20th at 71%. So you're in that interesting era where Bama is going through that change. Their receiving talent has not been what it was in the past. It's still good, but it's not what it was in the past. And their quarterback depth chart is bad, and their offense is struggling mightily. Looks a lot like some of the old Notre Dame offenses. And so, it's you got to capitalize, Ryan. That's the whole point, right? Now, whether it's Jamie French or more so focusing on the kids that are still on the board, like, yeah, we love Jamie French, but instead of flipping him, let's get Talon Taylor. Let's get, you know what I mean? Let's get Dalen McCutcheon. Let's get Derek Meadows. Let's get the guys that are already on the board for us instead of trying to flip a kid. But you still then can try to flip him, but your priority number one is using this Deuce Knight commitment to try to convince Talon Taylor to maybe expedite his process up a little bit. That to me would be the top goal for Notre Dame. And that's their number one guy on the board right now is Talon Taylor. And you hope that this will impact that positively. And it's like, because who are you most concerned about right now with Talon Taylor? For me, it's like, okay, yeah, Michigan and Ohio State, but it's a lot of Southern schools as well. Like he just visited Georgia last weekend. Well, hey, we just got a Southern kid to come up here, man. You know what I mean? Like, you don't got to go down there to play with the best. We just got one of the best from the down south to come up and play with us. So it certainly helps. Certainly helps. Yeah. So Ryan, that's going to do it for the breakdown of Deuce Knight to Notre Dame. It's going to also do it for that mailbag portion. We have plenty more coming up. Ryan here in a few minutes. We're going to take a brief intermission, and Ryan is going to talk about the upcoming Notre Dame weekend. We were going to do like a visit review of this past weekend, but really the primary guy is Bear Bachmeier. That's no longer pertinent. I think it was like about an hour after you put that update up on Bear, and Bear talked about taking his time and stuff like that, and and then Deuce commit. So it worked out great. But you're going to talk about. So we're going to kind of call a little bit of an audible, and Ryan's going to skip that portion and talk about the Ohio State game, which was going to be the third section of what we were going to discuss today. But now it's not really relevant. So he'll talk about that, and then he'll finish up with another mailbag at the end. That'll be more. There'll be some more Deuce questions, but it'll be a lot more of that. So we'll be back here very shortly. So don't go away. Just give us about a 60-second break here, real quick, to kind of get everything set up for that, and we'll talk to you again very soon. But before I leave, folks, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. If you are listening via podcast platform, give us a 5-star review. And if you've not done so, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com, because there's going to be a lot of action going on this week, folks. I promise you, this is not the end of the recruiting action for Notre Dame this week. It's going to be a lot of fun. So we'll talk to you very, very soon.
IB Nation, welcome back to the Irish Breakdown Podcast. We are live here, of course, on a Monday for Notre Dame Recruiting Hour. Just finished up our Deuce Knight portion of this podcast. Now we're going to move on to a little bit of an Ohio State preview, not one that's going to be super in-depth. We're more going to focus on just a couple of key takeaways that I have early on, kind of previewing Ohio State and what it could potentially mean for the University of Notre Dame as they head into that weekend. We know the relevance, I believe, more so from a Notre Dame season perspective, what it means, right? If Notre Dame is able to go and take on Ohio State and defeat them for the first time in my lifetime, that would be obviously a big movement from the 2023 perspective. But I also want to talk about the recruiting side of things and what impact it could have. We'll also hit a mailbag at the end. We have a bunch of comments already starred. Mailbag, please hit the MB before the question. We'll be able to decipher between what is a mailbag question, what's just general conversation. And I'm excited to get into this, folks. This is a big week of recruiting. I mean, you guys are going to have recruiting updates all week. You're going to have some more visitors added to the visitor list. You should go to boards@irishbreakdown.com as well. If you want to hit on there, we have the visitor list posted right on the front of the Champions Lounge message board. So make sure you hit that up. And of course, the rest of the week, we'll be giving you previews for Ohio State football as we get Notre Dame fans ready to take on the Ohio State Buckeyes. So let's get into a little bit of Ohio State from a recruiting perspective, because I really think that this is a very interesting conversation to have, because I think there's a lot of different layers to this, right? It's not as easy as Notre Dame beats Ohio State. Ohio State's a really good recruiting team. Notre Dame overtakes Ohio State and they move the needle with players on campus. I think there's a lot of things that we need to talk about when we talk about the importance of this weekend. The first thing that I really want to discuss is, I have said this many times, and I believe Brian has said it as well. And we've definitely discussed it in volume on this podcast before. But in order for Notre Dame to get back, because what are the goals of Notre Dame football? The goals as a Notre Dame supporter is you want to see Notre Dame get back to national relevance, and not national relevance as in you're a 10-win team that no team can take for granted on a week-to-week basis. That's not national relevance because it's Notre Dame. Notre Dame's national relevance is national championships, winning, being that team that can contend and win in any given season. That's what you're pushing for. And obviously, over the last 10, 15 years, it has been run mostly through the SEC. Alabama obviously had their string of success. Clemson followed and had their string of success. But now we're back to the University of Georgia with back-to-back national championships. And those are the teams right now, Georgia specifically, that Notre Dame, in order to get to that level, you need to overthrow, right? You need to dethrone in order to get to the top. But before you get to that level, right, before you get to the Georgias, the Alabamas, and I know some people are rolling their eyes like Alabama stinks this year, and I get it. I totally get it, guys. But before you get to that national relevance, to that level where you feel confident that Notre Dame can compete against any team on a week-to-week basis, and not just compete, but win, and a win in the biggest moments of the season, you have to become, in my opinion, the power of the Midwest. And right now, there are two teams that threaten you, obviously, and for different reasons. Michigan threatens you because they have won the Big Ten in back-to-back years, and they have made the college football playoff in back-to-back years. But for the longest time, it's Ohio State. It's the team that has recruited at a high level, has competed, has won a national championship in the last 10 years, as a team that has made multiple college football playoff appearances. That's the team that you need to dethrone as the power of the Midwest. And how do you do that, right? How do you do that? I feel good about Notre Dame coaching right now. I feel good about Marcus Freeman, that era, and the coaches that he has put around this program. I think that they will continue to develop and that this program is on a great trajectory from a developmental perspective. But one of the easiest parts to dethroning a place like Ohio State is to recruit them, is to become the recruiting power, hopefully, in the Midwest. And how do you do that? There's a lot of ways you could do that. One, charisma as a staff. Notre Dame has that. Marcus Freeman has that. We all know that. Obviously, you start making your waves. Getting a guy like Deuce Knight out of the state of Mississippi shows to other players in similar backgrounds or demographics or regions that, hey, going up to University of Notre Dame's kind of cool. Like, that's pretty neat, right? That's different. But more than anything, you have to show that you can beat them on the field. And right now, I believe, and not to give you guys any spoilers for the rest of the year, for the rest of the week, but I think Notre Dame has a very good chance to beat Ohio State this week. I do. But the fact of the matter is that you have to look at it from the perspective of all the Notre Dame recruits that are going to be on campus, for the Deuce Knights, for the Owen Strebigs, for all the commits on campus, for the Rowan Burns, for Talon Taylor if he ends up making the trip, for those types of guys, and Christian Jones there's a lot of great football players that are going to be on campus this week, and more to be announced as the week goes on. But for them, can they confidently say that they think Notre Dame is going to beat Ohio State? Us as Notre Dame fans, right? People that support this program and think that Notre Dame is taking a step forward, we can, I think, feel pretty confident. Well, we feel, I think, as a collective, that Notre Dame has a very good chance to beat Ohio State this week. But when you're looking at it from a recruiting perspective that does not have an allegiance to a program, that is not a fan, can they confidently sit there and say, I think that Notre Dame is going to beat Ohio State this week, or even beat them convincingly? Can they confidently say that? It's never happened in their lifetime, like it's never happened in my lifetime. And for their entirety of them growing up, Ohio State has been one of those threats, a team that could potentially get to the playoffs, contend for a national championship. So Notre Dame, in order to get to the top of the mountain, I think first you need to dominate your area to get to the top of the mountain. You need to show that Ohio State is a team that Notre Dame can beat on the field and then can win in some recruiting battles. If you are able to do those things, then Notre Dame has a chance to escalate or rise to the power, the premier power in the Midwest. They're always going to be a power. They have their brands. They are Notre Dame football. There's always going to be, that name is always going to resonate with people, with parents, with recruits. It's always going to resonate. But in order to get to that level, Ohio State is the team that you need to dethrone on both areas of this coin, right? Not just recruiting, not just winning games on the field. You need to do both in order to beat them. Because Michigan's not going to out-recruit you for the most part. They're not. And you haven't played them in a couple years now. If Notre Dame is able to go out and defeat a team like Ohio State, yes, it's at home. Yes, Notre Dame has a chance to do it. But I really think that Notre Dame has a chance to make they have a chance to put an exclamation mark on the impact and the momentum that they are building. They have a chance to make a statement this week against Ohio State. That's what they have the opportunity to do. And that's the first big takeaway that I have for this week, is that Notre Dame has a chance to flex their muscles against Ohio State and say, hey, guys, we don't care what you've done over the last 10 years. We don't care what you've done in the last couple. We don't care. We are the premier power. We have been in the past, and we are back here to stay. The other big thing is that this is from a national perspective, because I think the first point of the Midwest power is for the Talon Taylors of the world, right? For the Christopher Burgesses of the world, for the local kids. You just lost Justin Scott to Ohio State just a couple months ago. For the small scale of regionally, if Notre Dame's able to show that they can defeat Ohio State and be that type of program, then that's going to resonate with the local kids, the players that are around the neighboring areas, the neighboring states, the Illinois, the Michigans, the Ohios, that type of demographic. But then I think that we need to take it even bigger to a national perspective, because Notre Dame isn't just recruiting Indiana and Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania, the schools that are the places, the states that are pretty close by. Notre Dame is touching all areas. I'm talking about California in 2023, getting guys like Rico Flores Jr. and Cooper Flanagan, both who played A lot of football this past weekend for Notre Dame, by the way, in their victory. Good. I mean, Rico Flores is a great catch in that one. You also talk about Texas, Jaden Greathouse, Braylon James, Caleb Smith, Micah Bell, 2023. You talk about 2024, going down into North Carolina, getting Bryce Young, getting Micah Gilbert, making waves down there. And then you take it now into 2025. Your three current commits in the Notre Dame class in 2025 are two players from the state of Florida, which, breaking news, Notre Dame has had their struggles in over the last X amount of years, and the state of Mississippi. You're making waves across the country. This isn't just a regional thing for Notre Dame. That's the beautiful thing about Notre Dame, is that Notre Dame can touch everywhere. They can touch every place. They can go up into Canada and have a pipeline that's being built there. They can go down to Texas and start a pipeline there. They can go out to California and get a player usually every single year. They can go down to Florida now in 2025 and get a couple commits there. They can go down and get a 5-star upside quarterback out of the state of Mississippi. Notre Dame can touch any place that they want to touch based upon their brand. But you know what would make it a lot easier to touch those places? Beating a place like Ohio State. Because Ohio State is not just reserved for the Midwest. This is not just one of those things where no SEC school, no Southern kid they're not ignorant to what Ohio State football is, right? This isn't like just a Midwestern power that doesn't resonate across the country. Everyone knows Ohio State. They're also a big brand. If Notre Dame is able to defeat Ohio State, I think this also has a national relevance. You are able to show to the Californias, to the Texas, to the Floridas, and everywhere in between that, hey, Notre Dame is that school up north. If you're a player that is going to choose Ohio State coming out of the state of Georgia, let's say, in a scenario, why can't you go up to Notre Dame instead? Why can't you make that decision? The pathway is being built for that. And I think that's the national perspective. I really do. I think for me, you're not just attracting and keeping the Illinois kids home, the Indiana kids home, and then tapping into Ohio occasionally. You are touching everywhere. And the easiest way is to show that Notre Dame is the place to be up north. If you're a Southern kid, if you're a California kid that wants to go play football someplace different, why not go up to South Bend, Indiana, other than Columbus, Ohio? Why not do that? So I think that is what Notre Dame also has on the line. It extends beyond a regional perspective. It's also a national perspective. The other big part of this visit coming up for Notre Dame is that when we're talking, because we're talking about 2025 recruiting class, 2024 is pretty much done. If Notre Dame's able to get Garby Lambert and they get Davis Andrews, it's pretty much done. They're going to try, they're still going to be in contact with some players. Like, I'm sure there's a defensive lineman that Notre Dame will continue to recruit. I'm not talking about Justin Scott necessarily. I'm saying that I think that they'll still be doing their homework on the defensive line. I think they'll still be doing their homework at corner potentially. I think they'll be doing their homework maybe at wide receiver if the right one's on the board. There are still some players that could potentially be in the class for 2024, but for the most part, Notre Dame's done. Right? You're nearing the end of the 2024 recruiting cycle. You have 23 commits in the class, and it's not going to get a ton bigger than that. 2025 is the main area of attention at this point. You have 3 commitments in the class now, with Justin Thurman, 2025 running back out of Tampa Jesuit in the state of Florida. You have Davion Dixon out of Miami Palmetto in the state of Florida, and now you have Deuce Knight, obviously out of the state of Mississippi. It's a really nice start. It's great. But Ohio State is going to be the biggest recruiting weekend of the season, even more than USC, in my opinion. You're going to get a lot of players on campus. If you've looked at the visitor list, Notre Dame has already verified a lot of great players that are coming to campus. And trust me, folks, it is going to get a lot bigger before this weekend is over. Before this week is over, excuse me. The recruiting weekend for Notre Dame is going to be massive. And I talked about this a little bit in the first section of this podcast, but I think it's very important to hit on a little bit more in depth, is that Notre Dame has a great recruiting chip this weekend. Great recruiting chip. I'm not talking about the players on the field. I'm not talking about the coaches. I'm not even talking about the other commits on campus for Notre Dame. With Deuce Knight committing to the University of Notre Dame today, that means that Notre Dame now has a legitimate brand at quarterback. A young man that a lot of people know. I just had a kid text me. I just had another kid text me that said, wow, we got Deuce. Or wow, they got Deuce. And that makes you think for a second. And this was a kid, just to be honest with y'all, this is a kid that is not a local kid. He's not a kid that knows who Deuce Knight is from a region perspective. A young man that doesn't play high school football near where Deuce plays, but it's caught people's attention already. Getting that type of quarterback on campus when you have when getting a player on campus, when you have players like Owen Strebig coming to campus, Christopher Burgess coming to campus. Expect a couple safeties to be on board before the weekend starts. So have Christopher Jones, who is a top 100 linebacker out of the state of Nebraska. Getting those types of quarterbacks on campus. I mean, it's getting this type of quarterback on campus with that long of a list and that many great football players. It is so instrumental to what 2025 can look like. Think about this, guys. What happened the minute that CJ Carr committed to University of Notre Dame? You have Cam Williams commit, you have Jack Larson commit, and you eventually end up with one of the best offensive recruiting classes that Notre Dame has signed in some time in what they have right now. Looking forward to Ohio State, you have the same opportunity getting Deuce Knight fresh off the commitment to Notre Dame on campus to talk to all those cats. There's a long list of great offensive linemen that are going to be there that weekend. So a lot of defensive players, a lot of skill position players. There is a lot of great football players, man, that are going to be on campus. And Deuce Knight has a chance, and we're already seeing it on Twitter. Go follow Deuce on Twitter because he's already recruiting guys already. And having that entity, having that impact on campus, fresh off the commitment, I don't think we can undersell that one. It's hard to even quantify enough how important that is. 2024 offensive class is incredible. I think having CJ Carr combined with Aeneas Williams, Kedron Young, Cam Williams, Logan Saldate, Micah Gilbert, Jack Larson, Anthony Knapp, Peter Jones, Styles Prescott, and hopefully Gerby Lamberts. That's a tremendous class. One of the best offensive classes that Notre Dame has had in some time. But I'm here to tell you, folks, there is a chance, and again, speculation on my part, right? But speculation, it's educated speculation. It's educated speculation. That Notre Dame has a chance to outdo themselves in 2025. They have a chance. They have a chance. I'm not sitting here saying Deuce Knight is a better quarterback prospect than CJ Carr. That's not what I'm saying. But there's a lot of kids right now that are heavily interested in Notre Dame that are big-time offensive recruits, man. Big time. I mean, Brian mentioned Taylor. I think Notre Dame's in a good spot early on in that one. They're in a great spot with Owen Strebig. They are in a great spot with James Flanagan. They're in a great spot with Rowan Byrne. They're in a great spot with several offensive players. It's not even counting the defensive players that may also want to play with a guy like a Deuce Knight. So I think for me that when I look at the impact of this season or this weekend, it goes well beyond just on the scoreboard this weekend. It goes well beyond what 2023 could be. It goes well beyond the impact of beating Ohio State. It's just that Notre Dame is consistently, since Marcus Freeman got here, in my opinion, they are trying to outdo themselves in recruiting. And I think they have the chance to do that, man. I think they have the chance to do that. But they don't do that without the legwork that they put in 2023 and 2024 to get to this point. But now that you have Deuce in this class, with the momentum you're riding, to get him on campus around all these great recruits, I think Notre Dame has a chance to have a massive weekend. And I'll go a lot more in depth. I'm going to have an extra recruiting show this week. And I'll go a lot more in depth on the names you need to know for Notre Dame this weekend. There's a lot of them. And I will be sure to fill you all in with where things stand, where things are trending, where things might end with each one of those recruits as we get forward to that weekend. But it's going to be exciting, folks. It's going to be exciting. Outside of the fandom, and trust me, I'm a fan as well. I'm excited because I think Notre Dame has a good chance to beat Ohio State, which will be a monumental outcome. But on the recruiting side of things, you have a chance to resonate, right? To take that next step forward, to leave a ripple effect in the ponds. You have that chance this weekend. And I'm really excited about it, man. Really excited. I hope you guys can hear that. I lost my voice a little bit this weekend. A little bit. I was at Notre Dame, obviously, so screaming from the stands. Lost the voice a little bit. But I am here with just so much excited for what Notre Dame football can be. And a part of that is the recruiting that they are doing and the potential that the 2025 class, I think, ultimately could have if it keeps going forward. So that's some brief thoughts, a little bit of an intro into the recruiting weekend. Again, later this week, we'll talk more in depth about some of the players you can expect on campus. But I'm going to do that later on and really give you guys a little bit. I mean, that's going to be probably a long show. It's probably going to be a long recorded show for you all. And I hope you all enjoy that. But I'm going to get to the mailbag next. We already have a ton of mailbag questions in the chat. So if you want to keep throwing mailbag questions in, just hit a MB or a mailbag in front of the question. We make sure to answer as many questions as you guys have through the remainder of this show. But that's going to do it for this portion of the podcast. Please, before you leave, if you're going to leave, don't leave though, because we're going to go to the next section. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast, the notification bell if you're listening to us on YouTube. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, 5-star reviews are very much appreciated. Make sure you subscribe over there at whatever podcast platform you have, what podcast platform you use, or that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that good stuff. Make sure you subscribe to the channel as well. But that's going to do it for this section of the Notre Dame Recruiting Hour. Fellas, it is mailbag time. We're going to get into all these questions. Make sure you're going to keep putting mailbag questions in the chat. We're going to get through as many as we possibly can. Thank you all, as always, for submitting some fantastic questions. We had a super chat from Irish42. Thank you so much, Irish42. Really do appreciate it. Have you broken down the film on the preferred walk-on commit? A little bit, Irish42. So we're talking about Mr. Southall, who is out of IMG Academy in the 2024 class, wide receiver, who just announced yesterday that he was committing to the University of Notre Dame as a preferred walk-on. His father, Cornelius, I believe Southall, was a player for Notre Dame in the 90s. So he's a legacy recruit. I have watched him a little bit. I would say this about Southall. He is a talented athlete. I think he brings a really nice profile to the table. I mean, he's 6'1", 180 pounds listed, has some pretty good verified numbers as well. It's just about, the maturation as a talent is continuing to move forward. I think he's a little bit more athlete than he is pure football player right now, which is probably why the preferred walk-on designation is on him right now. But I'll tell you what, man, Notre Dame's preferred walk-ons, and this is from a full scope program perspective, they are taking massive step forward, because you heard us talk in nauseum, I'm sure. 2023, Notre Dame was able to get Luke Talich in the class. They were able to get, obviously, as a preferred walk-on, Jordan Faison in the class. They were able to get Henry Garrity in the class. Players that had legitimate scholarship offers. I mean, because I'm trying to remember the offer list real quick. So Luke Talich had offers from Washington State, from Utah, from Oregon State. Jordan Faison had a football offer from the University of Iowa, on top of being a fantastic lacrosse player. So Notre Dame, I mean, they are bringing in some incredible talent from a preferred walk-on perspective. Forget about just the scholarship players. Adding a guy, in my opinion, like a Xavier Southall, like that's legitimate, right? Like you're getting faster all around the field, even from your walk-on program. So I really think that it was a nice get. Again, it's more about development now moving forward. I don't think that he's going to be as I don't think he's necessarily going to look like Jordan Faison early on, in his Irish career. I remember people were talking about Jordan Faison getting legitimate minutes this year. Like, I don't see that from Xavier Southall, but I do think I do see a talented athlete that I think has some upside moving to the next level. So I was excited about it, man. I think that's really cool. I mean, anytime you get a legacy commit, that's pretty neat. But also he's a player that has some athletic upside and brings some traits to the table to get excited about. So Notre Dame ups the preferred walk-on program. They continue to get stronger everywhere on the field. We had another super chat. This one was from Isaac Atkins. Isaac, thank you so much. I think Notre Dame wins the matchup in the trenches, which wins the game 28-17. Well, Isaiah, we'll be able to break down, obviously, the game throughout the week. What I'll say about this is I understand Notre Dame's, for Notre Dame fans' concern. All right, and I'm having some connection issues. We'll just have to work through it, folks. My apologies, as always. Winning in the trenches, Ohio State. I'm much more worried about Ohio State winning in other spots in the trenches. I've watched Ohio State over the first couple weeks. Ohio State's offensive line is very good. Ohio State's defensive line is very talented. JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer is a talented kid, although he hasn't really put it together yet. You have Michael Hall, who's a talented football player inside, Tyreek Williams, Ty Hamilton. You have a really good defensive line for Ohio State. Very talented. Offensive line-wise, I don't know what anyone has seen over the first couple games that would make me feel worried about Ohio State's offensive line. So I just push back Isaac for me. Like I push back at least halfway there. Does Ohio State's defensive line worry me in some instances? Sure, it does. I mean, in some areas, like I worry a little bit about Pat Coogan, Zeke Corral, and Rocco Spindler working against Michael Hall and Tyreek Williams on a snap basis. Sure, but am I worried about Josh Fryer and I think it's Josh Simmons, the transfer from San Diego State, and those types of cats defending Notre Dame's defensive line? Not necessarily. I think Notre Dame has a lot to prove still with the defensive line, but I'm not necessarily worried about it. So, I mean, yeah, we'll see. I push back. I don't think that the advantage is going to be won by Ohio State convincingly. Yeah. So that's just my perspective, Isaac. We'll be able to work through it the rest of the week, but I mean, I don't know. I just personally haven't seen anything from Ohio State's offensive line that makes me look at it and say, like, oh man, they're going to win the battle convincingly. I just don't see that. I think it's going to be a good football game. I think it's going to be competitive on either side. I don't think it's going to be an 11-point outcome in this instance, right? Like 28-17. I think for me, it's like more, I think it's going to be a close game going either way. I do agree with you, though, in the sense that I do think that who wins in the trenches is going to be the difference potentially in the football game. I think we see eye to eye there. I just don't know if I would say that Ohio State has like the clear advantage. So hope that makes sense. But yeah, it'll be interesting though, Isaac. I hope you tap in the rest of the week, man. We'll be able to break down all the great players Ohio State has, all the great players Notre Dame has, and how everything stacks up. So thank you for the super chat though, man. I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much. We had our weekly question from John Marinich. Odds they flip Caleb Beasley, or he flips Caleb Beasley. I guess it's talking about Deuce Knight being a Tennessee kid or being a Mississippi kid that has the Southern ties, whatever. John, I know people keep asking about this one, right? They keep asking about Caleb Beasley and they keep asking about Justin Scott. For me, like, this is where I am with these two players, and this is kind of where I'm going to end it, right? Is that these players are the two that keep getting asked. The Caleb Beasleys, and I get it. Caleb Beasley definitely had or has interest in Notre Dame. Justin Scott obviously had interest in Notre Dame at one point. I would just believe it when I see it, is kind of the thing. Like, I do not think that anything has been verified from Caleb Beasley's side of him definitely coming this weekend, for one. Two, even if Caleb Beasley and Justin Scott both came, let's say, I think that Caleb Beasley would be the more likely player that you're able to flip down the line than what Justin Scott is. But regardless, I think both are going to be difficult. I just wouldn't hold my breath with it, man. That's all I'm saying. Like the Justin Scott stuff is dead at this point, in my opinion. Do you have more of a chance with a Caleb Beasley and Justin Scott? Yes, you have more of a chance, but I don't think that it's a very big chance as of right now. I hope I'm wrong because Caleb Beasley is tremendous. I would love adding Caleb Beasley with Leonard Moore and Carson Hobbs. I think that would be a tremendous three-man class. But as of right now, just don't know if I would say it's necessarily likely. We had another question from Matt McCarthy who said, with Notre Dame stacking top 10 quarterbacks and the way they're recruiting well at wide receiver and cornerback, thanks to Chancey Stuckey and Mike Mickens, is that the blueprint for how they break through and win a national championship? I think it's definitely part of it, Matt. It is, yes. I think that those are – because what are the positions that Notre Dame always recruits well? Offensive line, tight ends, running backs for the most part, defensive line for the most part. I mean, Notre Dame has recruited those positions really well. Quarterback, I would say it's more of a development issue, but regardless, adding talented quarterbacks is always paramount. Wide receivers and cornerback recruiting at times have been an issue. It's been a little bit of an issue. So I look at those positions and say, yes, I think that is the big recipe for Notre Dame taking it to the next level. The position that you have had some weakness on in past from a recruiting perspective, if you're able to turn it and cut the gap, if you're able to cut the gap between what's the great, the Ohio States and Alabama's at the wide receiver position, for instance, cornerback defensive back recruiting, cornerback recruiting, that Ohio State and LSU and those types of schools have done in the past, then you're closing the gap on them. Because honestly, I think back to the 2020 game for me from Notre Dame when Notre Dame played Alabama in the playoff. I didn't think that Alabama had a big advantage in the trenches. I didn't. I think Notre Dame's offensive and defensive lines played pretty good in that football game. I think the biggest advantages, outside of quarterback, but the biggest advantages that Alabama had in that football game, in my opinion, was on the perimeter. I mean, like, Notre Dame just was not able to withstand Devonta Smith and be able to make plays in space enough. Like, they just weren't able to do it. So, yes, cornerback recruiting is something that's taken an uptick, and I think Notre Dame needs to continue to bolster that position. Quarterbacks, obviously. Outside pass rushers. And that goes to most spots, though, Matt, as far as, like, what is the recipe for success? The recipe for success is to make the most important positions the strongest. And Notre Dame is always going to be offensive line. But what are the premier positions? The premier positions on a football field, in today's game anyway: quarterback, cornerback, wide receiver, outside pass rushers. Those four, they matter. They matter so much. And I think that Notre Dame closing the gaps in those areas, I think, will definitely help to close that gap and to take you to the next level. So to your question, quarterbacks, wide receivers, cornerbacks, I think that is part of the recipe. It's not the only part of the recipe, but I think it's a major aspect. I would 100% agree. We had another question. This was from Chen Boats, who says, IB, how do you think the Notre Dame coaching staff compares to Ohio State? That's another question that we'll kind of dig into more, because that's like the biggest thing about matchups, is that it's not just about a player-to-player matchup or position-to-position matchup. It's also about coaching matchups. I mean, I talked about that a lot against NC State, where Al Golden needed to have a great game plan against Robert Anae, where Jared Parker needed to have a great game plan against Tony Gibson. Like, those matchups matter tremendously from the coaching perspective. I think for me, Ryan Day is obviously he's been a head coach longer. He's had more success because of that. We'll see, obviously, as Marcus Freeman continues to develop and he gets to that data sets, right? Like, you need a resume in order to be able to compare those two. But I think Notre Dame's coaching staff is right in that conversation with theirs. I mean, yeah. As I look at it and I say, Jared Parker, I think, has proven a lot of doubters wrong so far. He's looked very good throughout the first 4 games. Al Golden, although I did not like the game plan that Al Golden had in the entirety against Central Michigan, the defense has been pretty good for the most part. It's been pretty good. I think that Notre Dame's got some really good coaches on this staff. I think Ohio State's got some really good coaches. I think it's going to come down to, again, Ryan Day versus Al Golden, offensive coordinator versus defensive coordinator. Well, I should say play caller versus defense coordinator, whatever. And then it's going to come down to Jared Parker versus Jim Knowles. Those things are going to matter tremendously. So I really think that coaching is going to be a big layer of this conversation this week, Chenbo. And I think Notre Dame can definitely compete in those areas. I do not think it's a throwaway. And I know Al Golden worries a lot of people, and I get it, guys. To live by the sword, die by the sword, and that's what the blitz is right now for Al Golden. But we can't discount that there's been some good stuff on defensive film, and it's not just the talent. It's not purely a talent perspective. I thought the game plan against NC State was fantastic. I did. I thought there were adjustments, but I thought that more than anything, like they really pressured a quarterback, did not handle pressure well. So I think that it is about being consistent on a week-to-week basis, but there's been a lot of good things defensively, in my opinion. I don't think it's been all bad, and we should fire Al Golden and everything that people are saying in the chat, from a week-to-week basis. But yeah, he's a good player, man. Good. He's a good coach, and I think that he has a chance to have a big day against a very good offensive mind, Ryan Day. But we shall see. We'll see in a few days. Mark Avalone says, seemed odd to me how Notre Dame and USC are very different programs, but seem to attract different types of players, but it appears they compete for same players. How is that? Sorry, Mark. Let me reread that one more time because I'm a little confused by what you're asking, Zach. Seems odd to me how Notre Dame and USC are very different programs. Seems that would attract different. Oh, sorry. So it seems that would attract different types of players, but it appears they compete for same players. How is that? I mean, how many players have they really competed head to head for over the last 2 cycles? I mean, when you really think about it, I mean, aside from Kingston and Viliamu-Asa, there haven't been a ton that it was a Notre Dame versus USC battle. Was USC involved with some Notre Dame recruits that they were targeting? Sure. But I mean, for the most part, the only players that really matters for is the West Coast kids that USC is targeting, right? Because there's a national perspective and national relevance there. So, Mark, I mean, if there's other examples you want to give to me, but outside of Kingston, it's I mean, I guess Peyton Woodyard was pretty high on both schools at one point before going to Georgia and then flipping to Alabama, right? But I mean, other than that, I wouldn't say there's been a ton of one-to-one battles over the last couple of years. I mean, maybe historically we can have that conversation, but for me, it's, I think that Notre Dame and USC have only really attracted California kids for the most part, or West Coast kids. I just don't think that that's as prevalent. Excuse me. Can't speak. We had another question from DMND13. What's up, Dan? How does Deuce Knight being officially committed affect how big it is for him to be on campus this week for other recruits on campus too? You asked this before I went into the second section, Dan, so I wanted to, just still kind of put it up there, but I think it's massive, man. I talked about it in my second section. If anybody missed that, you should kind of rewind this podcast, but I think it's got regional impact. I think it's got national impact, and I think that it's big just for the recruiting aspect of things, right? Attracting players for a big-time quarterback on campus, I think it's very, very important. So it's big time, I would say. Brian Hockney was bringing up his chat. I'm sorry. Brian Hockney says, who was the last big recruit we landed from Mississippi? So there was a cornerback a couple years ago that committed to Notre Dame. I can't remember the guy's name. It wasn't Landon Bartleson. That was the kid that got kicked off. Can't remember the kid's name. I can try to find it in a second here. But so Notre Dame signed a cornerback in the 2019 class out of the state of Mississippi. Before that, they hadn't signed a commit out of the state of Mississippi or a recruit out of Mississippi since 1996. They did it in back-to-back classes, 95 and 96. Jarius Jackson was the last probably guys that I would say was a big time recruit out of the state of Mississippi. Obviously, he was Caleb Alford. Thanks, John. Yeah, so Caleb Alford was the cornerback that they got in the 2019 class out of the state of Mississippi. Before that, they hadn't signed someone since 1996. So that has been a long time, obviously. I mean, we're talking about 3 players since 1995 that have come out of the state of Mississippi. But before 2019 and Caleb Alford, they hadn't gotten a guy since 1996. So it had been a long time. So I would say, but the biggest thing for me is that, like Caleb Alford, was a 3-star cornerback coming out of the state of Mississippi that had tools to work with. He wasn't a big-time guy, to your question, Brian. The big-time guy was dating back to the late 90s when you got a guy like Jarius Jackson. Like, that was the last big guy from the state of Mississippi. That's why this is so big. It's outside of just talented quarterback, with a big ranking in the class. It's for me that you got a player that you haven't had a ton of success in that area in a long time, right? I mean, and I don't think Mississippi is going to be a spot that Notre Dame makes a living off of, but they maybe could tap into it more frequently now that you have a name quarterback that's coming out of there. I mean, it's going to make it more prevalent, not even from just the Southeast perspective, but from the Mississippi perspective. There's ever a guy like that as well. So, yeah, I mean, it's been a very long time to the question. Great question, though. Next question is from John Marinich, who says, how active a recruiter will Deuce be for us? I've already seen it, John. Go on Twitter. If you're on Twitter or X or whatever the heck the kids are calling it these days, Deuce is going to be a big-time recruiter. He's like a subtle kid. He talks, but like he's kind of a reserved kid is how I would kind of phrase it. But again, 6'5", 6'4.5", 6'5" quarterback, Southern kid, big ranking. That's going to attract a lot of players. And then you tap into also that he's a funny kid. He's got a good personality. I think it's going to attract a lot of players, and I think that he is going to recruit his butt off. I think that that's a big reason why he's coming this weekend. I think that makes a lot of sense. We had another question from Rob M. It says, do you think recruiting will take off in the cycle now, Brian? I was sweating defense more, to be honest. So obviously I know you phrased this for Brian, Rob, so I don't know if you want to ask him a little bit later in the week. But for me, like, you were in a little bit of a lull as far as you got Nate Roberts. You got Davion Dixon super early. Then you got Nate Roberts, which was a great get. And then obviously he ends up decommitting. You got Justin Thurman in the class. But you've been in a really good position with a bunch of recruits for Notre Dame. I talked about Owen Strebig. I talked about James Flanagan, Creed Thomas on the defensive side of the football. Ivan Taylor, like, you're in a good spot with a lot of dudes in 2025 class, but there have been a lull, obviously, in guys pulling the trigger as often in 2025. So I think that this could be a starting point for the next step of getting some guys to pop. Maybe even this weekend. Like, there's a couple kids that if they pop this weekend, I would not be surprised at all in the 2025 class. So I think that this can now kind of jumpstart things, Rob. I still have my concerns about, a couple spots, like defensive line recruiting. I think there's still some questions I have. Linebacker recruiting, I feel okay about, but it's, about, really pushing for a couple of the top guys. There's some concerns still, but there's a lot of good happening in 2025 behind the scenes. So I really think that Notre Dame is going to make a big step here as they get their 4-star with 5-star upside quarterback in Deuce Knight. But it's a great question. Michael Johnson says, can we flip other wide receivers and tight ends? Michael, I would say this, because I assume this is talking about 2024. It's possible, yes. I think that Notre Dame's going to do their homework at wide receiver. I think they're going to do homework at tight ends. I do. So is it possible? Yes, it's possible. Who exactly are those guys? That's another conversation point, and I'm sure that we'll have a deeper conversation about that in the future. But yes, I do think it's possible, to your question. We had a question from Nathan Milton, who says, does Deuce Knight have the talent to be a generational player? Yes. I mean, in a vacuum, yes, Nathan. I mean, he's going to be, in my opinion, 6'4.5", 6'5", 225 pounds, has a strong arm, one of the strongest arms in the 2025 class, but just in general, really good athlete as well. all the talent there to be that type of kid. But I think the generational thing is tough sometimes. I mean, because you asked me, does he have the talent to be generational? Yes, he has the talent to be generational. But there's a lot more that goes into being generational player than just the talents, especially at the quarterback position. Was Trevor Lawrence a generational player just because of physical traits? No, it was because he had leadership qualities. He was also smart. Like a lot of things go into it, especially at the quarterback position of being a generational player. So talent-wise, is Deuce Knight potentially generational? Could he become a generational player based upon talent? Yes, I would say that. But if he does become it, it's going to be because of a lot of other factors too. It's not just going to be because he's big and strong and fast. It's going to be also because he's a great leader. He has a great head on his shoulders. Could he show that? Could he be that? I think he can. But I think that it goes a lot further from just talents. So I hope that makes sense. It's a little bit more of a full package conversation for me. We had another question from DM13, ND13. Thank you so much. When is the last time the first three commits in the class were all from the South and even Southeast? Florida, Mississippi isn't normal for Notre Dame. Even the decommit was in the South too. Dan, I mean, I was literally trying to like rack my brain about it. I really like it's tough, right? It's tough because it hasn't happened often, if ever. I am probably going to be that weirdo that does the research to try to find out the answer. I'm sure it's happened. But it definitely hasn't happened recently. No chance it's happened recently. I mean, I'm trying to think back to so like 2024. You obviously CJ Carr. Well, actually, your first commit in that class was Brandon Davis Swain, who's a Michigan guy. So you got a couple of Michigan guys. You got a lot of Midwest and Northern guys. 2023, the early guys were Brendan Vernon, Ohio, right? You got Keon Keeley as one early guy in that class as well. But the first three guys being Southeastern guys, it's got to be a long time, man. It has to be. I don't know the answer to that one, though. But trust me, I will find out because I'm a weirdo who will do a lot of research before bed. It's going to happen. But it's definitely been a long time. I would say that very, very strongly that it's been a long time. From Ty C, who says, Brian and Ryan, just Ryan now, does Deuce Knight's skill set match the current offensive scheme, or will the coaching staff need to make changes to take advantage of his skill set? I wouldn't say change, right? There are things in the offense that Notre Dame can definitely employ with Deuce Knight. I think of like the RPO action. Sorry, I just got sidetracked by comments. The RPO action, ability to work with a play action, heavy run game, like he can do that stuff. Working vertically, he could definitely do that stuff. I think there's a lot of aspects to this offense that Deuce Knight can run and run very well. But for me, it's like it's all about wrinkles to the offense. There's going to be some things that I think you do more with Deuce Knight than you'll do with CJ Carr, for instance, with Sam Hartman, for instance, with Kenny Minchie, for instance. Like there's just different things. Like maybe I'm going to move the pocket more. Maybe I'm going to, a little bit more RPO action because of his ability as a runner. You run the zone read stuff off of the run action. Like there's a lot. I think there's just more things that you're going to try that maybe you necessarily wouldn't try necessarily, but I don't think you have to change your offense, right? I don't think that you have to necessarily change what you're doing. It's just about adding some different wrinkles that take advantage of his skill set completely. Right. And then we had another one from 99 Problems of BK81. What's up, 99 Problems? Brian and Ryan, not ranking them, but how do Dante Moore, CJ Carr, and Deuce Knight compare in terms of ceilings? I ask about those three because they are arguably the top quarterbacks in each class. Very good question. Ceiling-wise, if I had to rank CJ Carr, Dante Moore, and Deuce Knight, number one would be Deuce Knight. I think that he has every tool to be fantastic if developed properly. Next would be Dante Moore for me. I think Dante just physically, just from a passing perspective, I just think he's got a little bit more juice than CJ. and just a slightly more upside. It's not like by a landslide or anything, so don't get me wrong there. And I think CJ is number 3. But CJ number 3 is him being also very good and having a high ceiling, right? But Deuce Knight, I think, just brings special traits to the table. I think Dante brings a lot of special stuff as well to the table. CJ does as well. It's just in a little bit of a different package with CJ, a little bit of a different skill set. So I would go Deuce Knight, Dante Moore, CJ Carr. That would be my list. But it's a good one, man. It's a great question because, again, the floors matter so much in these conversations. Because if you ask me whose floors are the highest, I would probably say, man, actually, Dante and CJ would be fighting for me for the floor conversation. I might even give CJ a slight edge over him. But, like, if you had Dante Moore as your highest floor quarterback, I wouldn't say anything to you. If you had CJ, I wouldn't say anything to you. I really think it's neck and neck. And then there's a significant tier break, and then there's Deuce Knight, right? That's the difference for me. That's the difference. Next question is from Keith Wiggins. To compare Malik Zaire to Deuce Knight. Well, Deuce is significantly taller. Malik was 6 foot, 6'1", somewhere in that ballpark. I think he was maybe like 6'1.5". Deuce Knight is a legitimate 6'4.5", might be 6'5" for all said and done. So he's taller. He's got a skinnier frame than Malik. Malik was a dense dude. Like that, Malik was pretty strong, right, as a runner. So Malik was a little bit denser. I think obviously they're lefties, so that's a comparison I guess you can make. I think Malik's release was a little bit longer than Deuce's, but I think they both had very strong arms, and they both excelled at pushing the ball vertically. So I think that's the biggest. I think arm-wise, they have some similarities, but body type, I think they're a little bit different. And I also think Malik was a really good athlete, but Malik was more of that good straight line speed, but strong athlete, right? He could do some of the quarterback run stuff. Deuce could do quarterback run stuff as well, but it's going to look a little bit different, right? Like he's more like a sleek, long strider that's going to chew up grass. That's more of how he wins as a runner. So for me personally, I just think that there's a little bit of differences, but I think the similarities is, outside of them being lefties, is I think they both have strong arms and generate a lot of velocity. That's what I would say is the biggest similarities between Malik and Deuce, but Deuce obviously is a much different body type and a little bit of a different athlete. And not necessarily better athlete, just different athlete than Malik Zaire. We had another question, was from T Smith 0323. Says, me living in Ohio, should I just bunker down now just in case Ohio State fans come after me on Sunday? Hey, sir, you don't bunker down, man. You don't bunker down. You flash those Notre Dame colors and you wear them with pride if Notre Dame wins this football game this weekend. And if they don't, you still wear them with pride. But if you wear them, you talk some trash while also wearing them with pride. All right. So don't be scared, T. Smith. Don't be scared, man. Get some friends. Celebrate if Notre Dame wins this weekend. We had another question that was from Hold My Shillelagh, who said, am I right or wrong in thinking that the best thing for the quarterback room moving forward would be for Kenny Minchey to start next year? It's interesting. I mean, would it be best for Notre Dame if Kenny Minchey was the starting quarterback next year? I think that I would say, would it be best? I'm going to say yes. And the reason I say yes is because CJ is going to be a true freshman. I'm a big believer that you don't force true freshmen on the field at quarterback unless they're 100% ready. He might be, so it might be a moot point. But if Kenny Minchey is ready to start and Notre Dame is comfortable with him as a redshirt freshman, I think that says a lot to the development at quarterback for Notre Dame in the program currently. So I think that would actually be a great sign. I also think that if you have to go back to the portal, that means that you probably weren't happy with how some players developed, or you lost a player in the class, or lost quarterback from the room, I should say. Excuse me. But I think for me, would it be the best possible outcome? I would say yes, because it would be you developed a really talented quarterback best, then you still have CJ, you still have Steve Angel. You still have you still have CJ Carr, you still have Kenny Minchey. Still have Steve Angeli. Sorry, I'm mixing up my words terribly. And then after that, you're also going to get a player like a Deuce Knight that's going to come in as well. So I think that would maybe be best, but that's best as in where the program wants to get to. I think the program, in theory, would like to just develop quarterbacks from within and keep rolling them out that way. If there's another great quarterback, though, that's in the portal that says, like, I want to come play for Notre Dame for a year, am I going to say no? Absolutely not. And does that mean that it's not best for the program? Not necessarily, but I do think regulating the quarterback position to developing it properly would be big for Notre Dame. I do. So, yeah, I think that there's merit to both sides, but I think that it would be very beneficial for sure. We had another question from Backup who says, do y'all think the defense is better or worse than last year? Notre Dame's? I think it's better. 100%. Yeah, it's better than last year in my opinion. We'll see against Ohio State if it is for sure, and if it's significantly better. But yeah, I think it's better. 100%. Look, I know that they didn't play great against Central Michigan, but it's been a lot of good, man. You let up 6 total points in the first 2 games. Again, I know it wasn't against great competition, but then you had a great game plan against NC State. A great game plan. So, yeah, I think the defense is better than last year. I mean, it's basically all the same players outside of Isaiah Foskey, a year older in the system. So, yeah, I think the defense is better. I think it's going to be better. I think that they are a year older, a year mature, and they are playing a little bit faster than where they were in their entirety. And, yeah, so, yeah, I think the defense is better. We already pulled up Isaac's question. Isaac, I just gave you a double super chat there, man. Congratulations there. Wicked Bronco Productions with the super chat. Thank you so much, Wicked. Deuce reminds me so much of a bigger Lamar Jackson. I think he will help us pull more elite talent out of the SEC country. Any chance with the news, Justin Scott, Caleb Beasley, and Carter Nelson visit for the Ohio State game? I know Knight is friends with KB. So, Wicked, Lamar, I think it's going to be someone that he probably gets compared to a little bit just because of the frame and dual threat ability. I don't necessarily see that 100%. I think they're a little bit different of players, but thank you for the super chat on that side. Any chance? I already talked about it. Like, would it surprise me if Caleb Beasley came this weekend? No, not necessarily. I just wouldn't get my hopes up if he does, is all I'll put it at. Justin Scott, I would be surprised if he even visits, to be honest. I would be very surprised if Justin Scott makes the trip to Notre Dame, so I just don't see that one happening. Caleb Beasley is definitely more likely. Carter Nelson, we'll see, right? We'll see if Notre Dame's able to get him to campus and if they're able to make headway there. I know they're obviously been keeping in touch with him and all that, so we'll see if progress is made there. But as of right now, none of those guys have solidified visits, but I know Notre Dame obviously is working on some stuff. So we'll see if that happens or not, but nothing is solidified as of today. We had a super chat from Irish42. Thank you so much. What is your realistic stat line this weekend on both sides of the ball? Stat line. Irish42, if you're in the chat, what do you mean by stat line? Am I talking about a specific player? Am I talking about what the score projection is? I just want to know what you mean by stat line. Are you talking about just team totals? I mean, there's a lot that I can go there, right? I can go from players, I can go from team perspective, score perspective. I think Notre Dame has a very good chance to win. Now, I'm not going to say a score yet because we do our score predictions by the end of the week. But I think that Notre Dame has a very good chance to win. The over-under, I mean, because I just saw Jaded Clay say over-under. I think the over-under was in the 50s, if I remember correctly, as far as what it opened up as. I know Ohio State's 3-point favorites or whatever. I mean, we'll see if that dwindles down a little bit going towards the weekend. But, I mean, I think it's just too early for me to even predict what team totals will be and that type of stuff. And I'm definitely not giving you a score prediction yet, sir, if that's what you're looking for, okay? Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. So Irish42 just said yards, touchdown, points allowed, picks, Sam Hartman stats, Aldrich. Man, that's a lot. That's a lot for a super chat, man. Oh, I'm not going to give you I'm not going to give you points allowed because that would hurts my 52 over under. I think is correct. I'm not going to give you points allowed because that's going to ruin my score prediction for the end of the week. No, I'm not. Look, I will honor this super chat later in the week, Irish 42. You're just going to make me give you too much information. You're going to make me give you too much information early on in this week. We'll talk about game balls where we predict stats. We'll talk about score predictions. We'll talk about keys to victory. All that stuff's a part of it, right? I predict, and breaking news here, I guess, I predict Notre Dame wins this football game. That's my prediction as of right now. That's the only prediction I'm giving you, though, sir. But trust me, we'll talk about all that, and we will make sure to honor this super chat. But I do appreciate you very much, sir. Jason, I'm not going to blow this, man. I'm not going to blow this. This is a big week for us, all right? It's a big week, and I'm not going to give you all too much information on a Monday, okay? Not going to do that, sir. Not going to do that. Respect it. Respect the process. But thank you so much for the super chat, Irish. I'm sorry that was a big disappointment for you. My apologies. Rob Osgood, crazy question. With him being a lefty, does this mean Notre Dame needs to recruit offensive linemen accordingly, meaning right tackle is the blind side? It's a great question and an understandable question, Rob. My answer is no, though, because I believe that the difference between left tackle and right tackle have dwindled over the years. It's no longer a situation where you need a great left tackle and your right tackle can just be not good and you can figure it out and he could just be a big bruising guy and you just figure it out that way. You need both guys to excel in both areas to be a complete offense, in my opinion, nowadays. And I also think that that's a situation that you like. If there's so let's say this, for instance, I'm going to give you an example instead because I think it'll illustrate it a little better. If Deuce Knight was on the team in 2023 where you had Joe Alt and you had Blake Fisher, for instance, right? And he's your starting quarterback. Would I consider moving Joe Alt over to right tackle? I would. Because I just think that Joe Alt I think Blake Fisher is a good offensive lineman, but I think Joe Alt is substantially better as of right now as an offensive lineman than Blake Fisher. So would I consider it in that instance? Yes, in this situation. But in theory, you want both offensive tackles to be very good. So I don't think that you necessarily recruit to it. I don't think that you're going to push for that situation. But if there's a situation, but if you come into a point in your Notre Dame's career where Deuce Knight is a starting quarterback and you have two offensive tackles that are one is significantly better than the other, would I think about flipping over to right tackle and vice versa because of the importance of the blind side? I would consider it, but as of today, I don't think I would make any rash decisions in that area. But it's a great question. Great question, very understandable question, and a thought-provoking question too, which is always good. We had a question from Ben Tarnowski who says, really excited about this commitment, quarterback recruiting trending in a huge direction. My only question, I've heard it's different, weird to catch from a lefty. Is this true? Does it impact wide receiver commits? We talked about this a little bit earlier, Ben, and thank you for the chat, but it's just about the spin of the football, right? It's like if actually, no, it's a bad comparison. It's just about the spin of the football and how a football is going to come in and just kind of your angle of anticipation, if that makes sense, right? So does it change things a little bit? Yes, but I just think it's a repetition thing. I don't think it completely alters how you play football necessarily. It's just an adjustment that needs to happen. But there is a little bit of an adjustment that does need to happen. I don't think it affects wide receiver recruiting though, because honestly, I don't think wide receivers, especially high school kids, worry about that, right? I don't think that they do. They just think, put the ball in my vicinity, I'll catch the football and make plays. So I don't think it's going to affect wide receiver recruiting. It's just going to be something that when Deuce is the guy, you're going to really have to focus on reps of just kind of the subtle differences between a righty and a lefty. We had Andre Tonsil who says, not in my wildest dreams that I would ever think a quarterback room would be so talented. Now, what defensive players are going to pay more attention just because there's a chance to win a championship? I think that's where the impact goes, Andre. I don't think it's just wide receivers. I don't think it's just offensive linemen. I don't think it's just skill position. I don't think it's just offensive players in general. I don't think so. I think that it extends in the entirety of recruiting. Because Brian talked about Swamp Kings. I remember Brandon Spikes was one of the guys that was like, oh, the minute they had Tebow, I was Florida. It was it. That everyone wants to play with a great quarterback because as a defensive player, you want an offense to get ahead by a lot so you can pin your ear back and make a lot of plays and be aggressive, right? So you want to win ultimately. You want to play aggressively, and I think that's what quarterbacks bring to the table. So, yes, I would agree there. We had Keith Wiegand who says, who's the first wide receiver in the 2025 class to commit now? For me, of the targets that Notre Dame is pushing for, I would say the most likely guy to commit first as of today, because this is a group of Taylor is a guy Notre Dame really likes. Derek Meadows is a player Notre Dame really likes. Jerome Bettis Jr. is a player that Notre Dame likes. I think Cooper Perry is a player Notre Dame likes. Quincy Porter is a player Notre Dame likes. I would say out of those players, I would say Derek Meadows is probably the most likely person to commit first and make a decision. Then Jerome Bettis Jr. I mean, like Derek Meadows or Jerome Bettis Jr. would be my pick as far as like which wide receivers are probably going to make a college decision the quickest. Taylor, as of now, is not in a rush. He wants to take his official visits and all that type of stuff. So we'll see as that trends. But I think Derek Meadows has said this to me completely, and Jerome Bettis Jr. has in different words of when it happens type of situation. So those would be the two guys that I would predict would be those players. We had Adam Ziliak who said, how good was the recruiting strategy by Notre Dame with the Deuce recruitment? It was great. I mean, it really was. Brian hit on it a little bit, but just kind of recap a little bit of some of the things that happened. So Notre Dame was in a really good spot with Deuce Knight. I've been talking about that for months. Notre Dame and Tennessee, it was kind of that was the battle. Originally, Deuce Knight wanted to make a commitment during the season. That got extended, and his reasoning for that extension was he wanted to go to some games and see games, but obviously that ended up not really happening quite the way he laid out. But regardless, the recruitment got extended into the fall. Once it got extended, Notre Dame, I think, was very smart and wise, being ahead of the curve of let's make sure there's other quarterbacks out there that we really like. And they came obviously across Bear Bachmeier, who is a player that Notre Dame liked a lot. And if Bear Bachmeier wanted to commit to Notre Dame and Deuce Knight did not, they would have 100% taken Bear Bachmeier. Or I should rephrase, if Deuce Knight wanted to keep letting the process play out and Bear Bachmeier wanted to commit, Notre Dame would have taken a commitment from Bear Bachmeier. There's no doubt about that. But I think the smart thing that Notre Dame did was that they were honest about that, right? Like that's out in the open of like Bear's coming to campus and Bear's a player we like and we will take him. And I think that really did kind of make that process pick up a little bit and make it go a little bit quicker. So I think that they did a tremendous job of doing their due diligence, make sure there was another quarterback in this class that they really wanted, but also kind of put it into Deuce Knight's court. Like, hey man, like we love you, but like we need to make sure we get a really good quarterback in this class, and we hope it's you, but we need to make sure we have one. So I think that they did a tremendous job. To your question, Adam, I think that was a really good strategy by Notre Dame in this one. We had a super chat here from Lucky Ducks 512 who says, now that we have our quarterbacks for 2025, who are your top three on the board overall for Notre Dame? I didn't read this one before you started. I thought you were going to ask me top three quarterbacks on the 2026 board, and I was about to lose my mind, to be very honest with you, okay? But there's some good ones, but like, man, I'm not even thinking about that at the moment. Top three, I'll give you a top three on each side that I think are paramount players for Notre Dame in the class, okay? We'll go there. Wide receiver, Taylor. Offensive lineman, Owen Strebig. And and tight end, James Flanagan would be the three that I would pick as of right now that are like, let's get them in the class if we can. Because Taylor's a guy they love. Notre Dame obviously lost a commitment from Nate Roberts, a tight end in the class. So James Flanagan has become an even more key member potentially of the 2025 class. And Owen Strebig, I think, is an absolute star at offensive tackle. So get those three in the class offensively. Defensively, I would say defensive line-wise, Christopher Burgess is a guy out of the state of Illinois who will be on campus this weekend for the Ohio State game. That would be a big-time player for me. Defensive back-wise, like I mean, I don't think I could just pick one, honestly. Like, I mean, if they ended up with Ivan Taylor, Jadon Blair, Ethan Long, like any combination of those types of players that are on the board, I mean, Kendall Daniels, like there's so many good safeties on the board. I don't think I can necessarily pick just one there. Cornerback, again, you have Dallas Golden on the board. You have Devin Williams on the board. You have Dorian Brew on the board. You have Creed Thomas on the board. I would say for me, get whatever best corner you can get in this class. Get Anthony Sackett at linebacker. And then get Christopher Burgess at defensive ends. Those would be a few of the players that I think are premier players that Notre Dame really wants in this class potentially. But thank you so much, Lucky Ducks, for not asking me about 2026 quarterbacks. I appreciate you, sir. Yeah. Hey, man, I've been asked before about like classes 2 years in advance. So I appreciate you, man. Really do. Very much. All right. We had another super chat. This one was from Matt, 2011 GT. Thank you so much for the super chat, Matt. Appreciate it very much, man. In your opinion, what position needs the most attention in 2025? Based upon where they are today, I would say defensive line needs the most attention for me. I think safety's in a very good spot for several guys. I think cornerback will be just fine. I think linebacker will end up being just fine. Defensive line, I have a couple question marks. I think that defensive line needs some attention for sure. I think offensive line, I feel really good about where Notre Dame is with several guys. I feel good where they are with James Flanagan at tight end in 2025. And I think wide receivers will figure itself out. You already have your quarterback. You have a running back in the class as well. I think defensive line is the spot that I say, let's get some clarity on what players are trending to Notre Dame and what players we're pushing for. That is the position for me, Matt, that I have not the most concerns, but I think that needs the most attention moving forward to your question. And hopefully I took that one in the right direction that you were intending it to. But it was a great question regardless. And Anthony Sackett is a very large human. You are correct. I would 100% agree with that. Next question is from Brent Smith, who says, Al Golden may continue to send his linebackers and safeties on too many blitzes, rush 4, and play coverage, and use the blitz fires when the timing calls for the situation. Any thoughts, Ryan? Brent, I have a lot of thoughts about it, man, because it's a double-edged sword. It is. I called defenses before, and I was a guy that did not want to blitz much, right? Like I blitzed when it was more out of necessity than not. As a defensive coordinator, most of the time you would rather not blitz if you didn't have to. I mean, if you were good enough to just line up and just be a little bit diverse with what you're showing up front and the secondary, like that stuff usually wins a lot. Al Golden is clearly very comfortable with being an aggressive style defensive coordinator. There are two ways that could go. One is it is very organized. Think Brett Venables' defense at Clemson. Or it is not. Think Alex Grinch at USC. There's gap unsoundness in Alex Grinch defense, but in Brent Venables, they maintain pretty good leverage and discipline for the most part, but they are super aggressive. I think that defense could work, but you have to be consistent with it, man. The worst thing that could happen is there's confusion. A linebacker hits the wrong gap. You have two guys in one gap, and it's a house call for 6. So there's more volatility to that style. A lot more volatility. You could let up a lot more big plays in that scenario, in my opinion, than if you are a little bit more of a, I don't want to call it passive, but like a little bit more of a reserved defense, I guess. A team that's a little bit more like, let's keep things in front of us and not give up big plays and not be overly aggressive on the second level. So the volatility is there. I'm okay with it against certain teams. I think that it will come back to haunt Notre Dame at some points as far as letting up a big play or maybe in a big moment. So I'm not necessarily on board with it, but it's the reality we live in. And the reality is if Notre Dame is well coached and consistent with it, it can be successful. But you are putting yourselves in some bad situations if you are not consistent. If you're not consistent, then you could be in some very tough situations. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. It's a great question, though, man. I completely get the hesitation with it. I completely do. Bobby S. said, just got on here. Any news or updates on the surprise recruit expected to visit Saturday? Bobby, who is reporting that? Can you tell me? Like, if you want to message me on Twitter at Rise and Draft, if you want to put something in the chat, I'd very much appreciate that. Notre Dame is doing their due diligence to get a lot of really talented recruits on campus. I will say this, that forget it. I'm not even going to say that. But I would actually like to know who's reporting that, though, if you wouldn't mind. No, not gonna bash anyone. I'm just more curious than anything. So if you want to drop me a DM or if you want to drop me, okay, got it. Someone just put it in the chat. I guess I'm not overly surprised at that one. So yeah, well, keep updates. If there are any surprise visitors, we'll let you know when the surprise visitors are there. Okay. Thank you very much. We had Bobby S. also said Gerby committing this week would be add another huge boost. Any chance was his plan to get the hype energy for Ohio State? I don't think that was his plan, Bobby. Like, if you're asking me, would that be his plan? I wouldn't buy that. I think Gerby is just like, I think he's marching the beat of Gerby's drum, man. I still think Notre Dame is ultimately probably going to win that one. I think that they're in a very good spot with him. Just we'll see when it happens, right? I don't think that it's necessarily like a tactical thing to like upset Ohio State, though. I don't. I just think that Gerby is just going to make a decision when Gerby wants to, which it's his decision, so he can do that if he wants. So yeah. We had another question for Bobby S. Bobby had a lot of great questions here, man. You know, a lot of great questions. Let me sure I didn't miss anything in the chats. Yeah. Big Jim, I agree with you about Michael Roski, by the way. He's a very talented player. Bobby S. says over-under commits the next 3 weeks from 2024-2025 class, 2.5. I'm going to say public commits under 2.5 over the next 3 weeks. Would I be shocked if it was over 3 silent commits? Wouldn't be shocked. But I would say under 2.5 for public commits, which obviously is, I think, more pertinent to this conversation. We had our next question was from Jaded Clay, who says, should Jalen Sneed be benched after his performance at Central Michigan? No, I don't think he should be benched. I think that Jalen Sneed needs to play football. And he made some good plays. He made some puzzling ones. He had a couple missed tackles. I get it. But that kid needs to play, man. So I want him to play. There's this big push by a lot of people. Young kids make mistakes, throw them on the bench, never see him from him again. I'm a big believer in fix it and let the kid learn. All right? So let the kid learn is where I am with that one. We had another question. I think we're running down to the end here. If anybody wants to throw in a couple last-minute questions, please feel free so to do. I don't know. Live. My apologies. Please put in the chat the pronunciation on this one. My apologies. Ryan, what do you think the percentage of fans in the stadium between Notre Dame and Ohio State on Saturday? I think it'll probably be 55-45 Notre Dame. In reality, I hope it's closer to 60-40. I hope. I still don't have tremendous confidence that Notre Dame fans are going to show up necessarily, right? So I would say 55-45 Notre Dame split, but I hope it's at least 60-40 Notre Dame. I really do, man. It's a big game, guys. If you all have tickets out there, go to the game. Don't sell them, please. Go to the game. I plead with you. Please go to the game. Go to the game this Saturday. All right, let me check the chat to make sure there weren't a couple last-minute questions, because otherwise, I think I have one more question to answer. Matt, I'm not answering that question. That's a good way to get blocked, though, man. It's a good way to get blocked. No doubt about it. And this might be the last question. We'll see if anybody throws anything last minute. Bobby S. says, what's your realistic 2025 offensive line preference? Would Rowan Byrne from New York be a take for you? He would be, Bobby. For me, the ideal Notre Dame offensive line would be a four-man class of Owen Strebig, Rowan Byrne, Matty Augustine, and one of Will Black or Michael Roski. And I would be a very happy camper. I know people are going to ask about David Sanders. When David Sanders chooses to visit Notre Dame, then we can start talking about David Sanders. Josh Petty is a guy that I love. I would love Josh Petty in the class, but again, once Josh Petty decides to visit Notre Dame, then we can have a conversation about him. But as of right now, of the players that are interested in Notre Dame, which are some really good ones, that would be my ideal. Would be Owen Strebig, Rowan Byrne, Matty Augustine, and then one of Will Black or Michael Roski. I would be very happy with that 4-man class. Very happy. All right, let's double check to make sure we didn't get any more super chats. And we out. All right, fellas. Hey, before you leave, as Ryan Loftus just said, also, let's go Irish. I agree 100%. Let's get rowdy. Let's get nuts. Let's do everything, man. So before you leave, if you could please hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast. It's going to include a Notre Dame Recruiting Hour for today. We're going to be live every day this week, 1 o'clock Eastern time to talk Ohio State, Notre Dame, 6 o'clock Eastern time every night, IB Nation Sports Talk. I'll also have an extra Notre Dame Recruiting Hour show during the season. Like button, subscribe to the podcast, hit that notification bell. If you listen to me on your favorite podcast platform, 5-star review and tell everyone how much you love Ryan Roberts. I would really appreciate that so very, very much. IB Nation, talk to you all next time here on the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Again, you are joined at the Notre Dame Recruiting Hour. Thank you all so much. Talk to you tomorrow.